For 3 days, Lydia Rowe stood at Rustwood Station in a wedding dress that no groom would claim. The man who promised her forever didn't exist. The letters were lies. The future was ash. She had one meal left, no money, and strangers were starting to whisper. Then a child in boots too big for her feet appeared with an impossible question. "Will you marry my daddy instead?" That moment changed everything. A con became a chance, abandonment became belonging, and a desperate stranger became the heart of a family fighting to survive. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The afternoon sun pressed down on Rustwood Station like a judgment, and Lydia Rowe felt every degree of its accusation. She sat on the worn bench outside the telegraph office, her cream-colored wedding dress gathering dust from the Wyoming wind, her hands folded over a carpet bag that contained everything she owned in the world. 3 days. She'd been waiting for 3 days. The station master wouldn't meet her eyes anymore. The couple who ran the boarding house had stopped offering her sympathetic smiles. Even the children who'd initially pointed and whispered had grown bored of the lady in the wedding dress who never left, never ate, never spoke to anyone unless spoken to first. Lydia pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to will away the headache that had been building since yesterday. The hunger didn't help. She'd eaten her last piece of bread that morning, a stale roll she'd been rationing for 2 days, breaking off small pieces to make it last. Her stomach cramped with emptiness, but that pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. The letters were in her carpet bag, 23 of them tied with string. Everyone signed, "Yours in anticipation, Thomas Whitmore." Everyone describing the ranch he owned, the life they'd build together, the respect a good woman could earn in a growing territory. He'd sent a train ticket. He'd given her specific instructions. He'd promised to meet her at Rustwood Station on the 21st of September at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She'd arrived exactly on time, wearing the dress her sister had helped her sew, carrying her mother's cameo brooch and her grandmother's wedding ring, ready to start over. Ready to leave behind a Boston boarding house where she'd worked 16-hour days for a woman who'd called her ungrateful when she'd asked for a half-day off to attend her own sister's funeral. Ready to escape a city that had chewed her up and offered nothing in return but exhaustion and loneliness. Thomas Whitmore didn't exist. The station master had checked every record twice. There was no ranch registered to that name, no homestead claim, no tax records. Nothing. The address on the letters led to an abandoned property 15 miles north, according to the sheriff who'd ridden out to check when Lydia had finally worked up the courage to ask for help on the second day. "You're not the first," the sheriff had told her, not unkindly, adjusting his hat as he stood in the station office. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with eyes that had seen too much disappointment to be shocked by hers. "We've had 3 other women show up here in the past 2 years with similar stories. Different names on the letters, same pattern. Someone's running a scheme, collecting money from women back east, selling them on a dream that doesn't exist." I didn't send money," Lydia had whispered. "He sent me the ticket." The sheriff had nodded slowly. "That's new. Usually they ask for funds to prepare the house or some such. Did he ask you to bring anything of value?" She'd touched the cameo at her throat instinctively. "He said a bride should bring what's precious to her. He said he wanted to know I valued our future enough to invest in it." The understanding in the sheriff's eyes had been worse than pity. "He probably has someone watching the station. Once you arrived, they'd have approached you, friendly-like at first, maybe offered to take you to the ranch, and somewhere along the way—" He hadn't needed to finish. Lydia understood. She'd been meant to disappear. The cameo, the ring, whatever else she'd brought, that was the real prize. She'd gotten lucky, in a terrible sort of way. Something must have disrupted the plan. Maybe the watcher had been scared off. Maybe he'd been arrested for something else. Maybe he'd simply found a better target. But it left Lydia stranded in a town that didn't know what to do with her. The return ticket cost money she didn't have. The boarding house wanted payment she couldn't provide. And every hour that passed, the stares grew sharper, the whispers more pointed. Now, on the 3rd day, sitting in a dress that felt like a costume for a play that had closed before opening night, Lydia was out of options. The station master had offered to send a telegram on credit, but who would she contact? Her sister was dead. The boarding house owner would slam the door in her face. The friends she'd thought she had in Boston had vanished the moment she'd stopped being useful. She'd come west with hope and letters, and a dress that still smelled like the lavender sachets her sister had tucked into the trunk. She'd come west to become someone new. Instead, she was more lost than she'd ever been. The hunger made her dizzy, the sun made her head pound, and the shame, God, the shame was worse than both. She felt the eyes of the town on her like weights, pressing her down into the bench, grinding her into the dust. Maybe I should just start walking, she murmured to herself, staring at the dirt road that led north out of town. Pick a direction and see how far I get before… Before what? Lydia jerked her head up. She hadn't heard anyone approach, but there was a child standing directly in front of her, a girl of maybe 8 or 9 years old, with tangled brown hair escaping from 2 crooked braids, a face full of freckles, and a dress that had clearly been mended many times. But it was the boots that caught Lydia's attention. The girl wore leather work boots that were at least 3 sizes too large, the kind a grown man would wear for ranch work. They were scuffed and dusty, and the girl had to shuffle her feet carefully to keep them from falling off. Before I collapse, probably, Lydia said honestly. There didn't seem to be any point in lying to a child. I haven't eaten in a while. The girl tilted her head, studying Lydia with an intensity that was startling in someone so young. Her eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds over mountains, and they were filled with a seriousness that didn't match her freckled face. Are you the bride? The girl asked. Lydia's throat tightened. I suppose that's what people are calling me. The one who got left? Yes. The girl nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. You've been here 3 days. You've been watching me? Everybody's been watching you, the girl said matter-of-factly. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house says you're a cautionary tale. Mr. Patterson at the feed store says you're probably a con artist yourself, but I think you're just sad. The simple accuracy of it nearly broke Lydia. She pressed her hand to her mouth, forcing back the sob that wanted to escape. She would not cry in front of this child. She would not add hysterical to the list of things this town thought about her. I think, Lydia managed, voice shaking, I think I'm a lot of things right now. Sad is definitely one of them. The girl stepped closer, her overlarge boots shuffling in the dirt. Are you kind? The question was so unexpected that Lydia actually laughed. A short, broken sound. I'd like to think so. I try to be. Are you patient? Most of the time. Can you cook? Lydia wiped her eyes, studying the serious little face in front of her. Yes, I can cook, and clean, and sew, and manage a household. I worked in service for 8 years. Why? The girl squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and said with perfect confidence, My dad needs a wife. Will you marry him instead? For a moment, Lydia couldn't process the words. They seemed to hang in the air between them, as impossible as a marriage proposal from a child in overlarge boots should be. Then the meaning sank in, and Lydia shook her head. Sweetheart, that's very kind, but I don't think… He's a good man, the girl interrupted, her voice fierce with certainty. He works hard. He doesn't drink except 1 whiskey at Christmas. He's sad a lot, but he's never mean. The house is clean but empty, and I need help with my hair. She pointed to the crooked braids with a mixture of frustration and hope. Dad tries, but he can't make them even. And my dresses are all too short because I keep growing, and he doesn't know how to let down hems without making them look funny. And the house is so quiet all the time, and I think if someone kind came to live with us, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much anymore. Lydia's heart cracked open. This child, this serious, brave child in her dead mother's boots, because that's what they had to be, was trying to fix her family's grief by recruiting a stranger at a train station. It was the most heartbreaking thing Lydia had ever witnessed. What's your name? Lydia asked gently. Maisie Kincaid. I'm 8 years old, and my mama died 2 years ago when her heart just stopped working one day while she was hanging laundry. Dad found her in the yard. He hasn't been the same since. The matter-of-fact delivery of such devastating information made Lydia's own problems feel suddenly smaller. She reached out and took Maisie's hand, small and calloused, the hand of a child who'd learned too young how to work. Maisie, I'm very sorry about your mother, and I'm sure your father is a good man, but you can't just collect brides at train stations. That's not how it works. Why not? Maisie's gray eyes were challenging now. You need somewhere to go. We need help. Dad's too sad to look for a wife himself. He just works and never talks to anyone in town except to buy supplies. But I heard Mrs. Chen talking about you, and I thought maybe it could work. Maybe it's supposed to work. Life doesn't work that way, sweetheart. Maybe it should. Lydia closed her eyes. The child had a point. A ridiculous, impossible, desperate point. She was starving. She was stranded. She had nowhere to go and no money to get there. And here was a little girl offering an alternative to collapsing in the dirt and hoping someone kind would find her before something worse did. It was insane. It was impossible. It was... Her stomach cramped viciously, and Lydia swayed on the bench. Maisie's hand tightened on hers. When did you last eat? Maisie demanded. This morning. A piece of bread. Before that? Yesterday afternoon. Half a biscuit I bought with my last coins. Maisie's expression darkened with determination. That settles it. You're coming with me. Dad might be too stubborn to marry you right away, but he'd never let someone starve. That's not who he is. He'll feed you at least, and give you somewhere safe to sleep, and then we can figure out the rest. Maisie. But the girl had already turned and started walking, shuffling carefully in her two big boots, clearly expecting Lydia to follow. After 3 steps, she looked back over her shoulder. Are you coming or not? Because I'm 8, and I can't carry you if you faint in the street. And you look like you might faint in the street. Lydia looked at her carpet bag, looked at the station behind her where she'd waited for a ghost, looked at the dress she was wearing, the symbol of every failed hope she'd carried west. Then she looked at the small, fierce girl who'd appeared like something out of a fairy tale, if fairy tales included orphaned children in dead mothers' boots, recruiting brides for fathers who probably had no idea their daughters were playing matchmaker. It was the worst idea she'd ever heard. She stood up, grabbed her carpet bag, and followed Maisie Kincaid down the dusty main street of Rustwood, her wedding dress trailing in the dirt, her future completely uncertain for the second time in 3 days. But at least this time, someone wanted her there, even if that someone was 8 years old and wearing boots that didn't fit. The Kincaid Ranch was 5 miles out of town, and Maisie kept up a steady stream of information as they walked, her overlarge boots shuffling and scuffing with each step. Lydia had offered to carry her. The boots looked impossibly awkward, but Maisie had refused with dignity. They're Mama's, she'd explained. I wear them when I go to town because it makes me feel like she's still with me. Even though I know that's silly, at home I wear regular shoes that fit. Dad doesn't know I do this. He'd probably be sad if he knew. Lydia's throat had tightened, but she'd simply nodded and adjusted her grip on the carpet bag. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The road was rutted and dusty, lined with sage and scrub brush. In the distance, mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks still touched with last winter's snow. It was beautiful, harsh and wild, and nothing like Boston, but beautiful in a way that made Lydia's chest ache with something she couldn't quite name. That's Thunder Peak, Maisie said, pointing to the tallest mountain. And that's Widow's Ridge. Our ranch is in the valley between them. Dad says the land is good because the mountains protect us from the worst of the winter storms. Mama used to say the mountains were like God's walls, keeping us safe. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was the best, Maisie said simply. She sang all the time. Even when she was doing chores, she was singing. Dad used to tease her that she'd scare the chickens with her opera, and she'd laugh and sing louder just to prove him wrong. After she died, the house got so quiet. Sometimes I try to sing like she did, but it doesn't sound the same. It just makes the quiet louder, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. They walked in silence for a while. Lydia's feet hurt. Her good leather shoes weren't meant for miles of rough road, and her head still pounded with hunger and exhaustion. But Maisie's presence beside her was oddly grounding. The child's determination seemed to create a path forward where none had existed before. What will your father say when you bring me home? Lydia asked as they crested a small rise. Won't he be angry that you invited a stranger without asking? Maisie considered this. He might be quiet angry at first. That's the kind where he doesn't yell, but his jaw gets tight and he looks at the ceiling like he's asking God for patience. But once he sees you're hungry and tired and need help, the angry will go away. Dad can't stand to see things suffer. He once spent 3 days bottle-feeding a lamb whose mother rejected it. The lamb died anyway, but he tried so hard. He'll help you. He just might be grumbly about it at first. And you're certain he won't just take me back to town? Not tonight, Maisie said confidently. There's a storm coming. See those clouds? She pointed to the western horizon, where dark clouds were gathering behind the mountains like an army preparing for battle. Dad will say it's not safe to travel in a storm, and he'll make you stay until it passes. And by then, you'll have had a good meal and some rest, and you'll see that our ranch is a nice place, and maybe you'll want to stay longer. You've got this all figured out, haven't you? Maisie grinned, the first real smile Lydia had seen on the serious little face. Mama used to say I had the stubbornness of a mule and the optimism of a sunrise. She said it would either save me or drive me crazy. I'm hoping for saving. Despite everything, Lydia smiled back. Me too. They walked for another mile and then the ranch came into view. It wasn't large, nothing like the grand estate the fictional Thomas Whitmore had described in his letters, but it was solid and real in a way that made Lydia's heart lift despite her exhaustion. A 2-story house with a wide porch, weathered but well-maintained. A large barn, its red paint faded but its structure sound. Corrals and outbuildings arranged in practical patterns. Fields stretching toward the mountains, some showing the stubble of harvested hay, others lying fallow for the season. It was a working ranch, a home, a place where life happened. That's home, Maisie said softly, and the love in her voice was unmistakable. It's not fancy, but it's good. And that's Dad. She pointed to a figure working near the barn, a tall man in dusty work clothes. His broad shoulders bent over some task Lydia couldn't quite make out from this distance. As they approached, he straightened, turned, and froze. Even from 100 yards away, Lydia could feel the weight of his stare. Maisie! His voice carried across the yard, deep, cautious, confused. Where have you been? I told you to stay close to the house while I was working. I went to town, Maisie called back, shuffling faster in her 2 big boots. And I brought someone home. Her name is Lydia and she needs help. And before you get quiet angry, you should know she hasn't eaten properly in 3 days and she's going to faint soon if we don't feed her. So your lecture about going to town without permission can wait until after dinner. Lydia watched the man's face cycle through several emotions: surprise, confusion, concern, and then a weary resignation that suggested this wasn't the first time his daughter had brought home strays. He started walking toward them, his long stride covering ground quickly, and as he got closer, Lydia could make out his features. He was probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that would have been handsome if it hadn't been carved deep with grief and exhaustion. His gray eyes, the same storm cloud shade as his daughter's, locked onto Lydia with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she forced herself to meet his gaze, to stand straight despite the dizziness, to project a dignity she didn't entirely feel while standing in a dusty wedding dress at a stranger's ranch. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm sorry for the intrusion. Your daughter was very kind to offer help, but I understand if you'd prefer to take me back to town. I don't want to impose." Cole Kincaid, and this had to be him, stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving from Lydia's face to her dress to the carpet bag she carried. His jaw tightened just as Maisie had predicted. "You're the woman from the station," he said. It wasn't a question. The one who was waiting for a man who doesn't exist. Lydia's cheeks burned. News travels fast. It's a small town, and people talk. His voice was neutral, but not unkind. 3 days, they said. You've been there for 3 days. Yes. And no one helped you? Not the boarding house, not the church, not... He stopped, his jaw working as if he were biting back words he wanted to say. Then he looked at his daughter. Maisie, go inside and start the stove for dinner. I need to talk to Miss... Rowe, Lydia supplied. Miss Lydia Rowe. I need to talk to Miss Rowe for a moment, privately. Maisie hesitated, clearly torn between obedience and concern that her father might send Lydia away. Dad, she really hasn't eaten, and... Maisie. The single word was quiet but firm. Inside. Now. Please. The addition of please seemed to settle the matter. Maisie shuffled toward the house, pausing at the porch to look back with an expression that clearly said, "Don't mess this up," before disappearing inside. Cole Kincaid watched his daughter go, then turned back to Lydia. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair at the temples. He looked like a man who'd been carrying weight too heavy for one person for far too long. "I apologize for my daughter," he said quietly. "She means well, but she doesn't understand that you can't just collect people like stray cats and bring them home. She said you once spent 3 days bottle feeding a lamb." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "That was different. The lamb was dying." "And what do you think I'm doing, Mr. Kincaid?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, fueled by 3 days of hunger and humiliation and fear. Cole's eyes widened slightly, and Lydia immediately regretted her tone. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "That was unfair. You don't owe me anything, and your daughter put you in an impossible position. If you could just loan me enough money for a telegram, I can contact—" But even as she said it, she realized she had no one to contact, no one who would send money, no one who would care. Cole seemed to realize it too. His expression softened just a fraction. "The wedding dress," he said. "It's real, not a costume. It's real. You came here to marry someone. I came here to marry a lie." The words tasted bitter. A man who doesn't exist. A future that was fiction. "I was a fool, Mr. Kincaid. A desperate, lonely fool who believed letters from a stranger because the alternative was spending the rest of my life scrubbing floors in a Boston boarding house where the owner worked her girls until they collapsed and paid them barely enough to survive. So yes, I came here in a wedding dress to marry someone I'd never met. And yes, I was stranded and swindled and left with nothing. And yes, your daughter found me contemplating whether I should start walking north and hope I found something before I starved or froze. Does that satisfy your curiosity?" She was breathing hard by the time she finished, her hands shaking with exhaustion and emotion. Cole stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he picked up her carpet bag. "Come inside," he said quietly. "You need to eat, and then we'll figure out what to do next." Lydia blinked back sudden tears. "I can't pay you." "I didn't ask you to." He started toward the house, then paused and looked back. "And Miss Rowe? I don't think you're a fool. I think you're brave. There's a difference." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Lydia standing in the yard with tears streaming down her face and something dangerously close to hope flickering in her chest. The interior of the Kincaid house was clean but spare, a home that had been maintained but not loved, functional but not warm. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space all in one, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and simple wooden furniture arranged with military precision. Everything was orderly. Nothing was personal. Lydia noticed the absence immediately. No flowers in vases, no decorative quilts draped over chairs, no small touches that would indicate a woman's presence. The house was a shell, inhabited but not alive. Maisie was already working at the cast-iron stove, her movements practiced despite her small size. She'd changed out of the overlarge boots and into shoes that actually fit, and the transformation made her look even younger, more vulnerable. "Sit," Cole ordered, gesturing to the wooden table that occupied the center of the room. Lydia sat, too exhausted to argue, and watched as he moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency. Within minutes, he'd set a plate in front of her. Bread, cold chicken, cheese, an apple. Simple food, but to Lydia, it looked like a feast. "Eat slowly," Cole warned. "Your stomach's not used to food right now. If you eat too fast, you'll get sick." Lydia nodded and forced herself to take small bites, even though everything in her wanted to devour the entire plate in seconds. The bread was fresh and soft. The chicken was seasoned with herbs she couldn't identify. The cheese was sharp and rich. She had to blink back tears at the simple mercy of it. Maisie brought her a glass of water, then sat across from her at the table, chin propped on her hands, watching with satisfaction. "See, Dad? She needed help. I was right." "Being right doesn't make it proper," Cole said, but his tone lacked heat. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching Lydia eat with an expression she couldn't quite read. You can't go around town collecting strangers. I didn't collect her. I offered her a solution to a problem. Maisie's logic was unassailable in her own mind. She needed a place to go. We need help, it makes sense. Life isn't that simple. Why not? Cole had no answer for that. He rubbed his face with both hands, looking suddenly older than his years. Maisie, go check on the chickens. I need to talk to Miss Rowe. I already checked them this morning. Check them again, please. Maisie sighed dramatically, but obeyed, shooting Lydia one last encouraging look before heading out the back door. The moment she was gone, Cole pulled out a chair and sat across from Lydia, his hands folded on the table. I apologize for my daughter, he said again. She's been struggling since her mother died, and apparently she's decided that the solution is to recruit a replacement. Lydia set down her fork. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Mr. Kincaid. I know, you're just trying to survive. He said it without judgment, just fact. And Maisie has a good heart, but this situation is impossible. You understand that, right? You're a stranger. We don't know each other. I'm not asking you to marry me, Lydia interrupted, feeling her cheeks flush. Despite what your daughter might be planning, I'm not looking for a husband. I'm looking for work, a way to pay my way until I can figure out what to do next. Cole studied her face. What kind of work? Anything. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, mending. I worked in service for 8 years. I know how to run a household. I know how to work hard. I'm not afraid of labor, Mr. Kincaid. I'm just afraid of starving in the street while people walk past and pretend not to see me. The bitterness in her voice made Cole's expression soften again. The town should have helped you. The town thought I was a con artist or a cautionary tale. Your daughter was the only one who thought I was human. For a long moment, Cole said nothing. Outside, they could hear Maisie talking to the chickens, a one-sided conversation about someone named Henrietta being a lazy layer and someone else named Margaret getting uppity about the roosting order. The domesticity of it, the normalcy, made Lydia's chest ache. You can stay tonight, Cole finally said. The storm's coming in and it's not safe to travel. Tomorrow we'll figure out a longer-term solution. I can probably arrange work for you in town. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house is always complaining about being short-handed, and I'd rather work here. The words were out before Lydia could stop them. Cole's eyebrows rose. Here? Your daughter is right. You need help. This house, she gestured at the stark, empty room. This house needs someone to make it a home again, and Maisie needs— Don't, Cole's voice went hard. Don't tell me what my daughter needs. You don't know her. You don't know us. You're right. I don't. But I know what it looks like when a child is trying to hold a family together because the adults are too grief-stricken to do it themselves. Lydia met his eyes steadily. I know, because I was that child. After my mother died, my father disappeared into his work, and my sister and I had to figure out how to keep our family from falling apart. So when I see Maisie wearing her dead mother's boots and recruiting brides at train stations, I know exactly what she's doing. She's trying to fix what's broken, and she shouldn't have to do that alone. Cole's jaw worked. For a moment, Lydia thought he was going to order her out of his house, storm or no storm, but then his shoulders sagged and he looked down at his hands, work-roughened, scarred, the hands of a man who'd spent his life building and maintaining and trying to hold things together through sheer force of will. 1 month, he said quietly. You can stay for 1 month. I'll pay you fair wages for housekeeping and cooking. You'll have the spare room upstairs. We'll keep this arrangement strictly professional and temporary. And when the month is over, I'll help you arrange travel to wherever you want to go. Agreed? It was more than Lydia had dared hope for. A month of safety, a month of food and shelter, a month to figure out her next step. She should have been grateful. She should have accepted immediately. Instead, she heard herself say, Why? Why what? Why are you helping me? You don't know me. As you pointed out, I'm a stranger. You could take me back to town right now, so why are you offering me this? Cole was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Because Maisie was right. You needed help, and no one was giving it. And because— He stopped, his voice catching. Because my wife would have been ashamed of me if I turned away someone in need just because it was inconvenient. The honesty of it, the raw grief underneath the words, made Lydia's eyes sting. She nodded slowly. 1 month then. And Mr. Kincaid? Thank you. For feeding me. For giving me a chance. For not assuming the worst. Thank you. Cole stood abruptly, as if the gratitude made him uncomfortable. The spare room is upstairs, second door on the left. Maisie will show you. There's a basin and pitcher for washing. I'll bring up your bag. He was gone before Lydia could respond, his boots heavy on the floor, his retreat almost desperate. She sat alone at the table, staring at the remains of her meal, trying to process what had just happened. She'd come west to marry a fiction. Instead, she'd found a fractured family in a lonely house, a grieving man who built walls to protect himself from more loss, and a brave child who wore her mother's boots and believed in impossible solutions. It wasn't the future she'd imagined, but sitting in that stark, clean kitchen, listening to Maisie lecture chickens and Cole moving upstairs with heavy steps, Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt like she might belong somewhere, even if just for a month. The storm hit 2 hours after sunset, arriving with the fury Cole had predicted. Lydia lay in the narrow bed of the spare room, listening to rain hammer the roof and wind howl around the corners of the house. Thunder rolled across the valley like God's own artillery, and lightning turned the darkness beyond her window into sharp, stuttering daylight. In Boston, storms had been muffled by brick buildings and crowded streets. Here, with nothing between her and the mountains but open land, the weather felt alive. A living thing that reminded her how small she was, how fragile. But inside the house, she was dry and fed and safe. The sheets smelled like lavender and sunshine. The pillow was soft. And for the first time in weeks, Lydia wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. 1 month. She had 1 month to prove her value, to make herself indispensable, to transform this temporary shelter into something more permanent. 1 month to save herself. She must have slept, because the next thing she knew, pale morning light was filtering through the curtains, and she could smell coffee brewing downstairs. Lydia sat up slowly, her body aching from yesterday's 5-mile walk and 3 days of near starvation. Her wedding dress lay draped over the room's single chair, looking deflated and pathetic in the morning light. She'd have to do something about that. She couldn't keep wearing a dress meant for a ceremony that would never happen. When she made her way downstairs, she found Maisie already at the kitchen table, attacking a bowl of oatmeal with single-minded determination. The child's hair was escaping from its braids again, creating a wild halo around her head. She looked up when Lydia entered, and her face split into a grin. "You're still here! Dad didn't make you leave." "Good morning to you too," Lydia said, unable to suppress a smile. "Your father offered me work for a month, if that's all right with you." "It's perfect." Maisie bounced in her seat. "See? I told you it would work out. Dad's making coffee. He'll be in soon. He's been up since before dawn doing chores. He always gets up early. Mama used to say he was half rooster." The easy way Maisie talked about her mother, mixing grief with humor, keeping her present through memory, made Lydia's chest tighten. Before she could respond, Cole pushed through the back door, bringing with him the smell of rain and hay and horses. His dark hair was wet, plastered to his head, and his shirt clung to broad shoulders. He stopped when he saw Lydia, something unreadable flickering across his face. "Miss Rowe, you're up." "I'm an early riser," Lydia said, then gestured to the kitchen. "If you don't mind, I'd like to start earning my keep. What would you normally have for breakfast?" Cole exchanged a glance with Maisie. "Usually oatmeal, sometimes eggs if the hens are laying well. Nothing fancy." "Then let me make breakfast," Lydia said firmly. "You've already done the morning chores? The least I can do is feed you properly." For a moment, she thought he might refuse. But then he nodded slowly and sat down at the table beside his daughter, looking uncomfortable with being served in his own home. Lydia moved through the kitchen, taking inventory. The pantry was well-stocked but utilitarian. Flour, salt, oats, dried beans, coffee, sugar. No spices except basic salt and pepper, no preserves or jams. Nothing that spoke of pleasure rather than mere sustenance. She found eggs in a basket by the door, fresh cream in the cold cellar, butter in the ceramic crock. Within 30 minutes, she'd produced scrambled eggs with cream, buttered toast, and fresh coffee. Nothing elaborate, but prepared with the kind of care that had been absent from this kitchen for too long. Cole took the first bite, and Lydia watched his eyes widen almost imperceptibly. Maisie was less subtle. This is the best breakfast I've ever had. Dad, why can't you make eggs like this? Because I'm not a cook, Cole said, but his tone was mild. He looked at Lydia across the table. Thank you. This is very good. The simple praise shouldn't have meant so much, but Lydia felt warmth spread through her chest. It's just eggs. It's the first real breakfast we've had in 2 years, Maisie said through a mouthful of toast. Dad and I just eat to stay alive. We don't eat to enjoy it. There's a difference. Maisie, Cole warned, but the child was unstoppable. It's true. Mama used to say that a meal made with love tastes different than a meal made with duty. And this tastes like someone cared about making it good. The silence that followed was heavy. Cole stared at his plate, his jaw working. Lydia busied herself with pouring more coffee, giving him space to collect himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. After breakfast, Maisie has chores. Feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, helping me muck out stalls. You don't need to. I'd like to help, Lydia interrupted gently. If that's all right, I need to learn the routine anyway. And Maisie can show me how things work around here. Maisie's face lit up. Really? You want to learn about the ranch? I do. I've never lived on a ranch before. I'll need a good teacher. I'm an excellent teacher, Maisie said proudly. Mama taught me everything, and now I can teach you. Right, Dad? Cole looked between his daughter's eager face and Lydia's careful smile, and something in his expression softened. Right. But Miss Rowe will need different clothes. Ranch work will ruin that dress. Lydia glanced down at the wedding dress she was still wearing. I have a few other things in my bag, but nothing suitable for farm work, I'm afraid. Mama's clothes are still in the trunk upstairs, Maisie said immediately. You could wear those. You're about the same size, I think. The air went out of the room. Cole's face drained of color, and when he spoke, his voice was barely controlled. Maisie, no. But Dad, I said no. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Miss Rowe can wear her own clothes for now. We'll arrange to get fabric from town so she can make something more practical. Your mother's things stay where they are. He walked out of the kitchen without another word, the back door slamming behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Maisie stared after him, her lower lip trembling. I didn't mean to make him angry, she whispered. I was just trying to help. Lydia moved to sit beside the child, taking her small hand. You did nothing wrong, sweetheart. Your father's grief is still very raw. Sometimes people need to hold on to things, physical things, because letting go of them feels like letting go of the person they've lost. It's not about you. It's about how much he misses your mother. But it's been 2 years. Mama wouldn't want her clothes just sitting in a trunk getting dusty. She'd want them to be useful. Your mama sounds like she was a practical woman, but your father isn't ready yet. And that's all right. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. Maisie nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Do you still grieve for people you've lost? Every day, Lydia said honestly. My mother's been gone for 12 years, and I still miss her. My sister died 6 months ago, and sometimes I forget she's gone and think about things I want to tell her. Grief doesn't disappear, but it changes. It becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you. Is Dad being crushed? The question was so perceptive, so heartbreakingly accurate, that Lydia had to take a moment before answering. I think your father is trying very hard not to be crushed, and he's doing a good job of it because he's taking care of you and the ranch and all the responsibilities he has. But yes, I think the weight is heavy, which is why you and I are going to help him carry it, all right? Maisie's face set with determination. All right, starting with chores. Come on, I'll show you how to feed the chickens. Fair warning, Henrietta pecks. The ranch work was harder than Lydia had anticipated and more satisfying than she could have imagined. Maisie led her through the morning routine with the confidence of someone twice her age, explaining which hens were broody, which goats were escape artists, and which horse would try to bite you if you weren't careful. That's Thunder, Maisie said, pointing to a massive gray gelding who watched them with intelligent eyes. He's Dad's horse. He's grumpy with everyone except Dad and me. Don't try to pet him unless Dad says it's okay. Lydia eyed the horse warily. Thunder stared back, looking unimpressed. Noted. They collected eggs, hauled water, scattered grain for the chickens, and checked on the goats. Lydia's back ached and her hands were already blistering, but there was something deeply satisfying about physical labor with visible results. In Boston, she'd cleaned rooms that would be dirty again by evening, scrubbed floors that would never look truly clean. Here, every task had meaning, every chore contributed to something larger. Cole appeared mid-morning, leading Thunder toward the barn. He'd regained his composure, but there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there at breakfast. He nodded to Lydia but addressed his daughter. "Maisie, I need to ride out to the north pasture to check fences. Storm last night might have brought down some trees. I'll be back by supper." "Can Miss Rowe and I come?" Maisie asked hopefully. "We could have a picnic." "The work's not suitable for—" Cole started, then caught himself, clearly remembering that Lydia had just spent the morning doing farm chores without complaint. "Maybe another time. Today I need to move fast." "All right," Maisie said, disappointed but accepting. "Be careful, Dad." Something in Cole's face softened when he looked at his daughter. "Always am." Then his gray eyes shifted to Lydia. "Thank you. For breakfast. And for helping Maisie with chores. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Lydia said simply. "We agreed I'd earn my keep. I take that seriously." Cole studied her for a long moment, as if trying to figure her out. Then he nodded once, swung up into Thunder's saddle with easy grace, and rode north toward the mountains. Lydia watched him go, noting the straight line of his back, the way he moved with the horse, as if they were a single unit. He was a man built for this life, shaped by the land, hardened by loss, and clearly more comfortable with animals and work than with people. "He likes you," Maisie said confidently. Lydia startled. "What? No, he doesn't. He barely knows me." "He doesn't trust Easy. But he thanked you. Twice. And he didn't argue when you wanted to help with chores. That means he likes you. Or at least he doesn't hate you, which for Dad is basically the same thing. Your father is allowing me to work here for a month. That's professional courtesy, not personal affection." Maisie gave her a look of such mature skepticism that Lydia almost laughed. "If you say so. Come on, I want to show you Mama's garden before we start lunch. Well, it used to be Mama's garden. Now it's mostly weeds. Dad doesn't have time to keep it up, and I don't know how to make things grow like she did." The garden was behind the house, bordered by a split-rail fence that needed mending. What had clearly once been carefully tended beds were now overgrown with weeds and wild grass. But underneath the neglect, Lydia could see evidence of someone's love. Stone pathways, a trellis for climbing beans, herb boxes that had been positioned to catch morning sun. This had been someone's sanctuary, someone's joy. "Mama could make anything grow," Maisie said, running her hand along the fence. "Even in bad years when other people's gardens failed, hers thrived. She said plants needed love as much as water. Dad says that's nonsense, but I think she was right." Lydia knelt beside one of the beds, pulling away weeds to reveal what looked like chives, hardy enough to survive 2 years of neglect. "I'm not much of a gardener," she admitted, "but I'd like to learn. Maybe we could work on this together? Start small, see what we can bring back?" "Really?" Hope blazed across Maisie's face. "You'd do that?" "If your father doesn't mind, it's his property." "He won't mind. He feels bad that Mama's garden died. He just doesn't have time to fix it. And he doesn't know how, anyway." "But if we brought it back," Maisie's eyes went distant with possibility. "If we brought it back, maybe the house would feel less empty." They spent the rest of the morning clearing one small bed, pulling weeds and turning soil that hadn't been touched in 2 years. It was back-breaking work, but Maisie attacked it with fierce determination, and Lydia found herself matching the child's energy. By midday, they had one section cleared and ready for planting. "We'll need seeds," Lydia said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "And I'll need to learn what grows well here. The climate is so different from Boston. We can ask Mrs. Patterson at the Mercantile. She knows everything about gardening, and Dad goes to town every week for supplies. We can go with him next time." The excitement in Maisie's voice was infectious. Lydia smiled, then noticed the son's position. "Speaking of your father, he said he'd be back by supper. I should start preparing something. What does he usually like to eat?" "Anything that's not burned," Maisie said pragmatically. "Dad's not picky, but Mama used to make this stew that he loved. beef and vegetables with herbs from her garden. She'd make a whole pot, and we'd eat it for days. I haven't had it since she died. Dad tried to make it once, but it wasn't the same. Did your mother write down her recipes? Maisie's face fell. I don't know, maybe, but I don't know where they'd be. They searched the kitchen together, opening cupboards and drawers, looking for anything that might contain recipes. What they found instead was a small wooden box tucked at the back of the highest shelf, covered in dust. Maisie pulled it down carefully, and when she opened it, both of them went still. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with faded ribbon, a pressed flower, a lock of dark hair, a small daguerreotype of a woman with kind eyes and Maisie's smile. And underneath it all, a worn notebook filled with handwriting so neat it looked printed. Mama's recipe book, Maisie breathed, lifting it out with reverent hands. I forgot she kept one. Dad must have put this box up high so he wouldn't have to see it. Lydia reached out to touch the notebook's cover, then pulled back. Maybe we should ask your father before we… No. Maisie's voice was firm. He put it away because it hurt too much to look at, but that doesn't mean it should stay hidden. Mama would want her recipes used. She'd want her food to feed people again. She thrust the notebook at Lydia. Please, make Dad's favorite stew. Let him remember what it tasted like when Mama made it. Maybe it'll help. Maisie, I'm not sure that's… Please. The child's gray eyes were pleading. Please help me give him something good to remember instead of just sad things. Lydia looked at the notebook in her hands, at the careful handwriting that spoke of a woman who'd loved her family enough to write down her knowledge so it wouldn't be lost. Then she looked at Maisie, who was trying so hard to heal wounds she was too young to carry. All right, Lydia said softly. Let's make your mother's stew. The recipe was detailed and precise, written in a voice that came through even in shorthand instructions. Beef should be cut in chunks no bigger than your thumb. Cole likes to chew his food, says it gives him time to think. Don't skimp on the carrots. Maisie will pick them out if they're cut too large, but she'll eat them if they're small enough to hide. Little notes about the people being fed, evidence of a woman who'd cooked not just to fill stomachs, but to show love. Lydia followed the instructions carefully, adapting where she had to based on available ingredients. The house filled with the smell of simmering beef, onions, herbs, and vegetables. Maisie set the table without being asked, using what were clearly the good dishes, white china with a delicate blue pattern. Mama got these for her wedding, Maisie explained. We only use them on special occasions, but I think tonight counts. Your father might not agree. He will once he tastes the stew. Cole returned just as the sun was setting, dust-covered and exhausted. He stopped in the doorway, his nose lifting to catch the scent of dinner, and something complicated crossed his face. Surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like pain. What is that smell? He asked slowly. Supper, Maisie said, trying and failing to sound casual. Miss Rowe made your favorite stew, the one Mama used to make. We found her recipe book. Cole's entire body went rigid. His eyes found Lydia, and for a moment she saw anger there, raw and bright. You went through my wife's things? We found them in the kitchen, Lydia said carefully, keeping her voice even. We were looking for recipes. I'm sorry if we overstepped, but Maisie thought wrong. Cole's voice was cold. I appreciate the effort, but you had no right to use my wife's recipes without asking. That notebook is private. Dad, Maisie's voice was small, frightened. It's all right, Lydia said quickly, moving between Cole's anger and Maisie's fear. She was trying to do something kind. If you're angry, be angry at me. I made the decision to cook from the notebook. Maisie just wanted you to have something that would remind you of good times instead of sad ones. Cole's jaw worked. He looked at his daughter, at her trembling lip and frightened eyes, and something in his expression cracked. He closed his eyes, took a long breath, then crossed to where Maisie stood and knelt in front of her. I'm not angry at you, he said, his voice gentler. I'm having a hard time with this. Seeing Mama's things, smelling her food again, it brings back memories that hurt. You understand that, right? Maisie nodded, tears spilling over. But Dad, I miss her too, and I miss eating food that tastes like love instead of just fuel. And I thought if Miss Rowe made Mama's stew, Maybe we could remember Mama without it only being sad. Maybe we could remember the good parts too. Cole pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her tight. Over her head, his eyes met Lydia's, and she saw the struggle there, grief fighting with the need to be strong for his child, pain wrestling with the desire to move forward. "I'm sorry," Lydia said quietly. "This was too much, too fast. I shouldn't have presumed." Cole was silent for a long moment, his face buried in his daughter's hair. Then he pulled back, wiped Maisie's tears with his thumbs, and stood. He walked to the stove, lifted the lid on the pot, and looked at the stew bubbling inside. His hand trembled slightly as he replaced the lid. "It smells exactly right," he said, his voice rough. "She always said the secret was in the herbs, timing them so they didn't go bitter. You got that right. Your wife left very detailed instructions. She was good at that, good at a lot of things." He turned to face Lydia fully, and she braced herself for another wave of anger. Instead, he just looked exhausted. "I'm sorry for snapping at you. This is hard. Having someone in the house, seeing things change, smelling things I thought I'd never smell again, it's harder than I expected." "I can go," Lydia offered. "If my being here is making things worse instead of better, I can find somewhere else." "No." Cole shook his head. "No, you can't, because Maisie's right. She does need help with her hair, and I am terrible at letting down hems, and this house has been more tomb than home for 2 years. And because—" He stopped, struggling with words. "Because Anne would be ashamed of me if I let grief turn me into someone who couldn't accept kindness or help when it was offered." "Anne," Lydia said softly. "That was your wife's name?" "Anne Catherine Kincaid. She was the best person I've ever known. She made everything better just by being in it. And when she died, the light went out of this place." He gestured helplessly at the kitchen. "But Maisie's light is still here, and she deserves better than a father who's so buried in grief he can't see that. So thank you. For the stew. For helping today. For trying to bring some life back into this house." The raw honesty of it left Lydia speechless. She could only nod, blinking back sudden tears. Maisie moved to her father's side and took his hand. "Let's eat Mama's stew together," she said, "and we can tell Miss Rose stories about Mama while we eat. That way it's not sad, it's just remembering, like Mama's still here with us, in the food and the stories." Cole's eyes were suspiciously bright, but he nodded. "That sounds good, little bird. That sounds real good." They sat together at the table, using the good china, eating stew that tasted like memory and love. And as the evening darkened outside, Cole told stories about Anne, how she'd sing opera to the chickens, how she'd once tried to rescue a baby skunk and ended up getting sprayed so badly she'd had to sleep in the barn for 3 days, how she'd believed that every meal was an opportunity to show love. Lydia listened, learning about the woman whose absence had carved such deep wounds in this family. And as she listened, she realized something that both comforted and terrified her. She wasn't trying to replace Anne Kincaid. She was trying to honor her memory by helping the family Anne had left behind find their way back to something resembling wholeness. It was the most important work she'd ever done, and she had only 1 month to prove she could do it right. The 2 weeks before the harvest, social passed with deceptive peace. Lydia finished her work dresses and helped Maisie sew the blue calico into something that made the child look older, more grown up. The garden beds produced their first tender shoots of green, and Maisie checked them every morning with the devotion of a pilgrim visiting a shrine. Cole worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences damaged by the storm, preparing equipment for winter, doing all the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch from sliding into chaos. But underneath the routine, tension built like thunderclouds gathering behind mountains. Lydia felt it in the way Cole's eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, in the way Maisie chattered more than usual as if trying to fill silences with noise, in the way the house seemed to hold its breath each evening when they all sat down to dinner together. They were becoming something. She could feel it happening, inevitable as seasons changing. But what they were becoming remained undefined, dangerous to name, easier to pretend didn't exist. On the morning of the social, Lydia woke to find Maisie already in her room, bouncing on the edge of the bed with barely contained excitement. Get up! We need to get ready. I want to look perfect, and you need to look beautiful so everyone sees how nice you are, and Dad needs to remember how to smile at people instead of just grunting." Lydia laughed despite herself, pushing hair out of her face. "Your father doesn't grunt." "He grunts," Maisie insisted, "especially at people he doesn't like. But today he has to be polite because Mrs. Patterson said the whole town will be there, and that means Griffin Hale might be there, and Dad can't punch him in front of the church ladies even if he deserves it." "Maisie!" Lydia sat up fully now, alarmed. "Has Mr. Hale been around? Has he bothered you or your father?" "No, but I heard Dad talking to Mr. Jenkins at the feed store last week. Mr. Jenkins said Hale's been asking questions about you, where you're staying, how long you'll be here, whether Dad's sweet on you." Maisie's expression turned fierce. "Dad told Mr. Jenkins to mind his own business and that Hale should do the same if he knows what's good for him." Lydia's stomach twisted with anxiety. She'd hoped that seeing Hale in town had been a one-time encounter, that he'd moved on to easier targets. The thought of him watching, asking questions, paying attention to her life at the ranch made her skin crawl. "Let's not worry about that today," she said, trying to sound calm. "Today is for celebrating the harvest and introducing you to your new dress. Let me help you get ready." They spent the morning in a flurry of preparation. Lydia braided Maisie's hair into neat plaits, weaving in ribbons that matched the blue calico. The dress fit perfectly, transforming Maisie from a ranch child into a young lady. When she looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes went wide with wonder. "Mama would have loved this dress," she whispered, touching the fabric reverently. "She always said blue was my color." "She was right," Lydia said, adjusting the collar one final time. "You look beautiful, Maisie. Your mother would be so proud of you." Maisie turned and hugged Lydia fiercely. "Thank you for making me feel pretty, for making everything feel normal again, for staying." Before Lydia could respond, Cole's voice called up the stairs. "If you ladies want to get to the social before it's over, we need to leave soon." They found him waiting by the wagon, and Lydia's breath caught. He'd shaved, trimmed his hair, and wore a clean white shirt with a black vest she'd never seen before. He looked younger, less careworn, and devastatingly handsome in a way that made her pulse stutter. Cole's reaction to seeing them was equally transparent. His eyes widened when he saw Maisie in her new dress, and his voice went rough with emotion. "Little bird, you look just like your mother did at that age. She'd be so proud." Then his gaze shifted to Lydia, and something changed in his expression, something heated and aware that made her suddenly conscious of the simple gray dress she'd chosen, the way she'd pinned her hair up, the small cameo brooch at her throat that was her only real piece of jewelry. "You look nice," Cole said, then cleared his throat as if the words hadn't come out right. "Both of you. Very nice. We should go." The ride to town was filled with Maisie's excitement, but Lydia was hyper-aware of Cole beside her, of the way his arm occasionally brushed hers when the wagon hit ruts in the road, of the stolen glances he thought she didn't notice. The air between them felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. The church grounds were already crowded when they arrived. Tables laden with food stretched beneath shade trees, and someone had set up a small platform for musicians. Children ran between adults' legs, playing games that looked half wild and wholly joyful. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread and apple pie filled the air. Mrs. Patterson spotted them immediately and descended like a well-meaning general. "There you are! Cole, take the wagon around back. Maisie, you look lovely, child. Miss Rowe, come with me. I want to introduce you to some people who aren't complete fools." Before Lydia could protest, she was swept into a whirlwind of introductions. Mrs. Patterson's friends turned out to be a collection of ranch wives and business owners who studied Lydia with frank curiosity, but without the malice she'd feared. "So you're the one working at the Kincaid place," said a woman named Sarah Chen, who owned the boarding house with her husband. "How's it going out there? Cole's not the easiest man to work for, I'd imagine." "He's been very fair," Lydia said carefully, "and Maisie is a joy." "That child needs a mother," another woman added, Martha something, who ran the laundry service. "Poor thing's been trying to hold that family together since Anne died. It's not right, a child carrying that burden." "Which is why it's good someone's finally helping," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, cutting off what was clearly about to become gossip. "Miss Rowe's been good for them. Anyone with eyes can see it. Now, let's get you some food before the men eat everything worth having." The afternoon passed in a blur of conversation and food and trying to remember names. People were curious, but mostly kind, and Lydia began to relax, to feel like maybe she could find a place in this community after all. She caught glimpses of Cole throughout the afternoon, talking to other ranchers, keeping Maisie from climbing trees in her good dress, helping set up the musicians' platform. Each time their eyes met across the crowded grounds, something passed between them that made Lydia's heart race. As evening approached, the musicians began to play, fiddles and guitars and someone's accordion creating music that was lively and infectious. Couples moved onto the makeshift dance floor, and Maisie appeared at Lydia's elbow, eyes shining. "Dad used to dance with Mama at every social," she said wistfully. "They were the best dancers here. Everyone would stop to watch them." Lydia's heart squeezed. "That must be a beautiful memory." "It is, but it makes me sad that he won't dance anymore. He says dancing was something special he did with Mama, and it wouldn't feel right with anyone else." Maisie looked up at Lydia with those two old eyes. "Do you think that's true? That some things are only special with one person?" Before Lydia could answer, a shadow fell across them. She looked up to find Griffin Hale standing there, dressed in an expensive suit that was utterly out of place at a ranch social, his smile charming and completely false. "Miss Rowe," he said smoothly, "what a pleasure to see you again. I was hoping we might have a chance to talk, clear up those misunderstandings from before." "There's nothing to clear up," Lydia said, standing and instinctively moving Maisie behind her. "I understand the situation perfectly, Mr. Hale. I'm not interested in any conversation with you." "Now, that's hardly fair. You've been listening to rumors and gossip when you should be hearing the truth from me directly." His eyes, cold despite the warm smile, slid to Maisie. "This must be the Kincaid girl. Pretty little thing. I knew your mother, you know. Anne and I were quite friendly before she married your father." "That's a lie," Maisie said fiercely. "Mama wouldn't have been friends with someone like you." Hale's smile tightened. "Children shouldn't speak of things they don't understand. Miss Rowe, if I could just have a moment of your time—" The lady said no. Cole's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. He appeared beside Lydia, and the violence barely contained in his posture made Hale take an instinctive step back. "Kincaid, I was just having a friendly conversation." "You were harassing women and children," Cole corrected, his voice deadly quiet. "And you just lied about my wife. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away right now and stay away from my family. If I see you near Lydia or Maisie again, I'll forget about being civilized. We clear?" For a moment, real anger flashed across Hale's face, replacing the charming mask. "Your family? That's interesting. I didn't realize Miss Rowe had become family so quickly. People might get the wrong idea about your relationship, Kincaid. Might damage both your reputations." The only person damaging reputations is you," Cole said. "Now walk away." Hale looked between Cole's set face and Lydia's defiant expression, and whatever he saw there made him calculate that this wasn't a fight he'd win today. He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Another time, then. Miss Rowe, my offer stands if you ever tire of playing housemaid to a grieving widower and his daughter. I can offer you much better prospects." He walked away before Cole could respond, disappearing into the crowd. Cole's hands were clenched into fists, his entire body rigid with suppressed rage. "Dad," Maisie said softly, taking his hand. "It's okay. He's gone." Cole looked down at his daughter, then at Lydia, and slowly the tension drained from his shoulders. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "People saw that confrontation. It'll cause talk." "I don't care about talk," Lydia said firmly. "Thank you for defending us. That man is poison, just like you said, Mrs. Seth." Patterson appeared at Cole's other elbow, her expression grim. "That was Griffin Hale, wasn't it? I heard he was back in town. Someone should have warned me. I'd have made sure he wasn't invited." "He's got a claim to public gatherings, same as anyone," Cole said wearily. "Can't legally bar him from church socials, but I can make sure he stays away from my people." "Your people," Mrs. Patterson repeated, her eyes sharp and knowing. "That's an interesting way to put it, Cole Kincaid." Before Cole could respond, the music shifted to something slower, more romantic. Couples moved onto the dance floor, and Maisie's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "Dad, you should dance with Miss Rowe. Show everyone that Mr. Hale doesn't scare us and that we're a family who stands together. Maisie, I don't think, Cole started, but Lydia cut him off. She's right. We shouldn't let men like Hale dictate our actions, and I could use a distraction from that unpleasant encounter. She offered her hand to Cole, pulse racing. If you're willing, Mr. Kincaid. Cole stared at her outstretched hand as if it were a snake. I haven't danced since Anne died. I'm not sure I remember how. It's just moving to music, Lydia said softly. Your body will remember. For a long moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then, slowly, Cole took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and the touch sent electricity up her arm. He led her onto the dance floor with the careful movements of a man approaching something dangerous, and when he placed his other hand on her waist, his touch was feather light, as if he was afraid she might break. They began to move, and Lydia was right. His body did remember. He led with unconscious grace, guiding her through the steps with the ease of someone who'd once loved dancing. But his face was tense, conflicted, and she could feel the war happening inside him. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. If it's too painful, everything's too painful, Cole interrupted, his voice raw. Eating the meals Anne used to make. Seeing Maisie grow up without her mother, watching the garden come back to life. But the pain means she mattered, that what we had was real. I'm not trying to forget her, Lydia. I'm just trying to figure out how to live again. The use of her first name, the honesty in his voice, made Lydia's eyes sting with tears. You're doing better than you think. Maisie sees it. I see it. Do you? Cole's gray eyes searched her face. Because most days I feel like I'm barely holding things together. Like I'm one bad day away from falling apart completely. And then you appeared and Maisie brought you home and suddenly the house feels less empty. I can breathe again, and that terrifies me. Why? Because I don't know if I'm ready for this. For you, for what it might mean. His hand tightened slightly on her waist. I don't know if it's fair to Anne's memory, or fair to you. You deserve someone who can give you their whole heart, not just the pieces that are left after grief took its share. The music swirled around them, and Lydia could feel every eye in the crowd watching this moment. Cole Kincaid dancing for the first time in 2 years, with the stranger who'd appeared at his ranch like an answered prayer or a complication, depending on who was telling the story. Maybe pieces are enough, Lydia said softly. Maybe nobody gets a whole heart anyway. We're all carrying scars and losses and broken places. But we can still choose to build something new with what we have left. If we're brave enough to try. Cole's eyes darkened with emotion. And are you brave enough to stay in a house haunted by my dead wife's memory? To help raise a child who's still grieving her mother? To live in a town that's already gossiping about us? To deal with men like Hale who won't leave you alone? I'm here, aren't I? Lydia met his gaze steadily. I could have left. Could have taken your money and moved on to another town, another life. But I'm still here, Cole. That should tell you something. It tells me you're stubborn. It tells you I've found something worth fighting for. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that went far beyond a simple employment arrangement. The song ended, and they stood still in the middle of the dance floor, hands still joined, the space between them feeling both vast and non-existent. Then Maisie was there, throwing her arms around both of them, and the spell broke. That was beautiful, she exclaimed. You danced just like you used to with Mama, Dad. Well, maybe not exactly the same, but it was still good. Cole pulled back from Lydia as if burned, his expression shuddering. I need some air, he muttered, and disappeared into the crowd before either of them could respond. Maisie looked stricken. Did I say something wrong? No, sweetheart. Your father's just working through some complicated feelings. It's not your fault. Lydia smoothed the child's hair, trying to hide her own disappointment and confusion. Why don't we find some of that apple pie Mrs. Patterson was raving about? They were heading toward the food tables when Lydia heard her name called. She turned to find Sarah Chen approaching with an expression of concern. Miss Rowe, I hate to bring this up at a social, but I feel I should warn you. Griffin Hale was asking questions about you at my boarding house yesterday. Wanted to know if you had any valuables when you arrived at the station. Whether you'd sold anything, whether you seemed to have money. Ice slid down Lydia's spine. What did you tell him? Nothing useful, but he's persistent and he's got a way of getting information out of people. I'd be careful if I were you. That man's dangerous, and he doesn't like losing. Losing what? He never had me to begin with. No, but he had a plan, and you surviving it intact ruined that plan. Men like Hale don't forgive disruptions to their schemes. Sarah glanced around, lowering her voice. There's talk he's connected to some bad people. Claim jumpers, cattle rustlers, men who aren't above using violence to get what they want. I'd hate to see you or the Kincaids caught up in that. Before Lydia could respond, a commotion near the church caught everyone's attention, raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, and then Cole emerged from the crowd with blood on his knuckles and murder in his eyes. Behind him, Griffin Hale was being held back by two other men, his perfect hair mussed, his lip bleeding. You'll regret that, Kincaid, Hale shouted. I'll have the sheriff on you for assault. Then have him come find me, Cole shot back. But first tell him why you were spreading lies about my wife, about Lydia, about my family. Tell him about your con games and your schemes. See how far that gets you. Mrs. Patterson pushed through the crowd, her face stern. What in heaven's name is going on here? Hale was running his mouth, one of the ranchers said, saying things about Cole's arrangement with Miss Rowe that no decent man would repeat. Cole took exception to it. Violently, Hale added, dabbing at his lip. He attacked me unprovoked. You provoked him plenty, Mrs. Patterson said coldly. You've been causing trouble since you arrived back in Rustwood, Griffin Hale. If I were you, I'd leave this social before people decide to take Cole's side and throw you out bodily. This is a church gathering, not a place for your poison. Hale looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him and calculated his odds. This isn't over, he said, directing his words at Cole and Lydia. Not by a long shot. He stalked away, and the tension slowly drained from the crowd. People began dispersing back to their conversations and dancing, though the festive mood had been irreparably damaged. Cole stood rigidly, breathing hard, his bloodied knuckles clenched at his sides. Lydia moved to him immediately, Maisie right behind her. Let me see your hand. It's fine. It's bleeding. Don't be stubborn. She took his hand gently, examining the split knuckles. We need to clean this before it gets infected. Maisie, can you get some clean water and cloth? As Maisie scurried off, Lydia looked up at Cole's face. What did he say that made you hit him? Cole's jaw worked. Things I won't repeat. Things about you, about us, about what he assumed our arrangement meant. I tried to walk away, I did. But he kept pushing, kept saying vile things, and He stopped, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I ruined the evening, embarrassed you and Maisie, made everything worse. You defended my honor, Lydia said firmly. That's not something to apologize for. Though perhaps we should leave before the sheriff does show up and things get more complicated. Already ahead of you, Mrs. Patterson said, appearing with their belongings. I've had your wagon brought around. Best get yourselves home before Hale decides to make more trouble. And Cole? Next time you want to punch that snake, do it where there aren't church ladies watching. Despite everything, Cole's mouth twitched toward a smile. Yes, ma'am. The ride home was silent and tense. Maisie dozed between them, exhausted from the day's excitement and drama. Cole drove with grim focus, his split knuckles gripping the reins, his profile hard against the darkening sky. Lydia wanted to say something, to break the silence, but she couldn't find words adequate to the complexity of what had happened. Cole had danced with her, had held her and spoken truths that sounded like the beginning of something. And then he'd fought for her honor, publicly and violently, in a way that would fuel gossip for months. She should probably be appalled by the violence. Instead, she was moved by it, by the proof that she mattered to him, that he was willing to defend her against men who would reduce her worth to rumors and speculation. They reached the ranch as full dark settled over the valley. Cole carried Maisie inside and up to bed while Lydia lit lamps and started heating water to clean his wounds properly. When he came back downstairs, he looked exhausted. All the fire burned out of him, leaving only ash. Sit, Lydia ordered, gesturing to the kitchen chair. Let me take care of your hand. Cole sat without argument, which told her how drained he really was. Lydia worked in silence, cleaning the torn skin, applying salve, wrapping his knuckles in clean bandages. Her touch was gentle, professional, but she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge.
"Lydia," he said finally, his voice rough. "What Hale said tonight about us, about our arrangement, people are going to talk. They're going to make assumptions. It's going to make your life difficult. Let them talk. It's not that simple. You're a single woman living with a single man and his daughter. In a city like Boston, maybe people would mind their own business. But here, in a small town, reputation matters. And I've already damaged yours by," he gestured helplessly, "by everything. By hiring you, by dancing with you, by defending you so publicly that everyone knows I—" He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he'd been about to say something dangerous. "That you what?" Lydia asked quietly, her hand stilling on his. Cole looked up at her, his gray eyes stormy with conflict. "That I care. More than I should. More than is wise. I told myself I was just offering you work, just helping someone in need like Anne would have wanted.
But it's become more than that, and I don't know what to do about it." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you want to do about it?" Cole stopped, took a breath, started again. "I want to ask you to stay, not as an employee, not as someone filling a role, but as someone who belongs here because we want you here, because Maisie needs you, because his voice cracked. "Because I've started imagining a future again instead of just surviving one day at a time, and that future has you in it. But I don't know if that's fair to you or to Anne's memory or to anyone involved." The raw honesty of it left Lydia breathless. She sank into the chair across from him, still holding his bandaged hand, trying to gather her scattered thoughts into coherent words. "Cole, I'm not trying to replace Anne. I could never replace her. She was Maisie's mother, your wife, someone clearly extraordinary. But I'm not asking to replace her. I'm just asking to be allowed to build something new alongside her memory, to help you and Maisie move forward while still honoring what came before. And if I can't separate the two, if part of me feels guilty every time I look at you and feel something other than grief, then we work through it," Lydia said simply. "Together. One day at a time. There's no rule that says healing has to look a certain way or happen on a specific timeline. You're allowed to grieve Anne and still build a new life. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." Cole stared at their joined hands, his bandaged and scarred from work, hers smaller but equally marked by labor. "What are you saying, Lydia?" "I'm saying I want to stay. Not just for another month, not just as an employee. I want to stay and see where this goes, to help Maisie grow up, to work beside you on this ranch, to—" She swallowed hard, gathering courage. "To be part of your family, if you'll have me. However that looks. Whatever form that takes." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then Cole stood, pulling Lydia to her feet, his good hand coming up to cup her face with achingly gentle touch. "If we do this," he said softly, "there will be talk. Hale will make trouble. The town will have opinions. And I'm still carrying grief that might make me difficult to live with sometimes. Are you sure you want to take that on?" Lydia leaned into his touch, letting herself feel the warmth of his palm against her cheek, the calluses that spoke of hard work and dedication, the slight tremor that betrayed how much this moment cost him. "I left Boston wearing a wedding dress meant for a man who didn't exist," she said. "I was swindled, stranded, and nearly starved. Then a little girl in her mother's boots asked if I'd marry her daddy instead, and everything changed. I found a home. I found purpose. I found a family that needed me as much as I needed them." So yes, Cole Kincaid, I'm sure. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Cole's eyes searched hers for a long moment, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign she didn't understand what she was agreeing to. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he slowly, carefully, lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, achingly sweet, the kiss of a man learning to feel again after years of numbing grief. Lydia's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself sink into it, into the promise and possibility and terrifying hope of it all. When they finally pulled apart, Cole rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I should ask you properly, court you, do this right." "You can do all of that," Lydia assured him, smiling.
But we both know where this is heading, and I'm not afraid of it. You should be. I'm a mess. We're all messes. At least we can be messes together. Cole laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face and made him look years younger. Anne would have liked you so much. She always said I took life too seriously, needed someone who could make me laugh at myself. Then I'll try to honor her memory by keeping you from being completely insufferable, Lydia teased. They stood there in the lamplight kitchen, holding each other, letting the moment stretch and settle into something real. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming autumn. The ranch settled into night around them, animals bedding down, the land cooling, stars emerging one by one over the mountains. Upstairs, Maisie slept peacefully, dreaming of blue calico dresses and mothers who sent strangers to fill the empty spaces grief had carved. And in the kitchen below, two broken people began very carefully, very hopefully, to piece together something new from the fragments of their separate losses. It wasn't the future Lydia had imagined, but standing in Cole's arms in a ranch house that was becoming home, she realized it was so much better than anything she could have planned. Sometimes the wrong train took you to exactly the right place. Sometimes getting lost was how you finally found where you belonged. The morning after the social dawned clear and cold, the first real hint of autumn in the air. Lydia woke to find frost patterns on her window and the smell of coffee already brewing downstairs. She dressed quickly in one of her new work dresses, braided her hair with hands that trembled slightly when she remembered the kiss from last night, and made her way to the kitchen. Cole was at the stove, attempting to fry eggs with his bandaged hand, and the result was predictably disastrous. Broken yolks spread across the pan, and he was swearing under his breath with a creativity that would have made a sailor blush. "Let me," Lydia said, gently taking the spatula from him. "You're going to set something on fire." Cole stepped back, looking relieved and embarrassed in equal measure. "I wanted to make you breakfast. After last night, after everything, I wanted to do something." "You did plenty last night," Lydia said, meeting his eyes with a small smile. "Including defending my honor and kissing me in your kitchen. That's more than enough for one evening." Color rose in Cole's cheeks, which was endearing on a man who'd faced down Griffin Hale without flinching. "About that kiss. If you're about to apologize for it, don't," Lydia interrupted firmly. "I'm not sorry it happened. Are you?" "No." The word came out rough, honest. "No, I'm not sorry, but I am worried about what comes next. We need to talk about this, about us, about how we're going to—" "Morning!" Maisie's voice rang out as she bounded into the kitchen, her hair a wild tangle, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Why are you both standing so close together? Did something happen after I went to bed?" "Dad, why are you blushing?" Cole took a hasty step backward, nearly tripping over a chair. "I'm not blushing. I'm just— the stove's hot. It's warm in here." "Uh-huh." Maisie's grin was knowing beyond her years. "So nothing happened. You didn't finally tell Miss Rowe how you feel about her, or anything like that?" "Maisie, because I've been waiting for you to say something for weeks now. The way you look at her when you think no one's watching, it's the same way you used to look at Mama, like she's the best thing you've ever seen." The kitchen went silent except for the sizzle of eggs in the pan. Cole's face had gone from pink to pale, and Lydia could see the war happening behind his eyes, the guilt fighting with the truth of what his daughter had just said. "Maisie," Lydia said gently, buying Cole time to collect himself. "Your father and I have become friends, good friends, and yes, there might be feelings developing that are more than friendship, but that doesn't mean we're trying to replace your mother or forget her. Do you understand that?" Maisie nodded solemnly. "I know you're not trying to replace Mama. Nobody could replace her. But Dad's been alone for so long, and you make him smile again, and you make the house feel like a home instead of just a place where we sleep and eat. Mama would want us to be happy. She told me that before she died. She said if anything ever happened to her, we should find a way to keep living and laughing and loving. She said grief was natural, but it shouldn't be forever." Cole made a choked sound and turned away, his shoulders rigid. Lydia moved to finish the eggs, giving him space, while Maisie went to her father and wrapped her arms around his waist from behind. "It's okay to be happy again, Dad," the child whispered. "Mama wouldn't want you to be sad forever, and I really, really like Miss Rowe. So if you like her too, that's good. That's what should happen."
Cole's hands came up to cover Maisie's, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "When did you get so wise, little bird?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention." Despite everything, Cole laughed. He turned and pulled Maisie into a proper hug, and over her head, his eyes met Lydia's. The gratitude and vulnerability in that look made Lydia's chest ache. They were doing this, actually doing this, moving forward together into uncertain territory, trying to build something new while honoring what had been lost. Breakfast was quieter than usual, but it was a comfortable quiet, weighted with possibility rather than awkwardness. Afterward, Cole announced he needed to ride out to check the northern fence line, and Maisie begged to go with him. "Please? I never get to ride Thunder with you anymore, and I want to see if the aspen trees have started changing color yet." Cole hesitated, looking at Lydia. "If you need help with anything, I'll be fine," Lydia assured him. "I was planning to work in the garden and start preserving some of the vegetables before the frost kills them. Take Maisie with you. She needs time with her father." An hour later, Lydia stood in the garden alone, harvesting the last of the carrots and checking the progress of other vegetables. The work was meditative, grounding, and she let her mind wander as her hands moved through familiar motions. She was pulling weeds from the herb bed when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Looking up, she expected to see a neighbor, or perhaps the post carrier who came by occasionally. What she saw instead made her blood run cold. Griffin Hale sat astride a beautiful chestnut mare, dressed in his expensive clothes, his smile sharp as broken glass. Behind him, riding a heavy draft horse, was a man Lydia didn't recognize, broad-shouldered, scarred, with eyes that held no warmth at all. "Miss Rowe," Hale called out, not bothering to dismount. "What a pleasure to find you alone. Where's your protector? The noble Mr. Kincaid?" Lydia stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands, calculating distances. The house was 30 feet behind her. Cole's rifle was mounted above the fireplace. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but she'd figure it out if necessary. "Mr. Kincaid is attending to ranch business," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You're trespassing, Mr. Hale. I suggest you leave before he returns." "Oh, I know exactly where Kincaid is. Saw him riding north with his daughter about an hour ago. That fence line is a good 3 hours round trip, which means you and I have plenty of time for a conversation." "We have nothing to discuss." Hale's smile widened. "On the contrary, we have quite a bit to discuss. Starting with the property you're currently standing on. You see, there's been an interesting development regarding the Kincaid land claim. It seems there's some question about whether Cole's father properly filed all the necessary documents when he originally staked this property 30 years ago." Lydia's stomach dropped. "That's ridiculous. This ranch has been in the Kincaid family for decades. Everyone knows that." "Everyone knows it, but can they prove it?" Hale dismounted gracefully, and the scarred man followed suit. "My associate here, Mr. Carson, happens to be the new territorial tax assessor. He's been reviewing old claims, looking for irregularities, and wouldn't you know it, the Kincaid claim seems to be missing some crucial documentation." "That's convenient timing," Lydia said, anger replacing fear. "Right after Cole publicly humiliated you at the social. This is revenge, pure and simple." "This is business," Hale corrected. "The fact that it also addresses a personal grievance is just a happy coincidence. Now here's what's going to happen. Mr. Carson is going to inform Cole that his claim is under review and that he has 30 days to produce the original deed and survey documents. If he can't, and I'm betting he can't because those papers probably burned in the house fire 20 years ago that Cole never mentions, then the land reverts to territorial holdings and goes up for auction. And you'll buy it," Lydia finished, seeing the scheme clearly now. "I'll buy it for pennies on the dollar, yes. And Cole and his pathetic little daughter will have nothing. They'll have to leave, find work somewhere else, probably end up in some boarding house where Cole works himself to death, and Maisie grows up knowing her father lost everything." The casual cruelty of it, the pleasure Hale took in describing their potential suffering, made Lydia's hands curl into fists. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just serve the notice and let Cole find out through official channels?" Hale stepped closer, and Lydia forced herself not to retreat. "Because I want you to understand your options, Miss Rowe. You're a practical woman. That's why you came west in the first place, looking to improve your situation. Well, here's a chance to improve it substantially. Come with me. Be my wife instead of playing house with a man who's still in love with a ghost. I can offer you things Cole never could: real wealth, social position, a life that doesn't involve scrubbing floors and mending fences. You must be delusional if you think I'd ever— I'm offering you a choice, Hale interrupted, his voice hardening. Come with me willingly, marry me, and I'll make the claim issue disappear. The Kincaids keep their land, you get a better life, everyone wins. Refuse, and I proceed with the claim challenge. Cole loses everything, and you'll be left with nothing but the guilt of knowing you could have prevented it. Lydia stared at him, seeing the trap clearly. If she refused, Cole would lose the ranch that had been in his family for generations. If she agreed, she'd be selling herself to save him, becoming the prisoner of a man who collected women like trophies and discarded them just as easily. That's not a choice, she said quietly. That's extortion. That's life on the frontier, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions to protect the people you care about. Hale's eyes glittered with malice. So what's it going to be? Your happiness or the Kincaid legacy? Your freedom or their home? Before Lydia could answer, Carson cleared his throat. Mr. Hale, we should go. Kincaid could come back early, and we don't want a confrontation on his property. Just a moment longer. Hale pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is the official notice of claim review. I could deliver it to Cole myself, or I could wait to file it until you've had time to think about my offer. 3 days, Miss Rowe. You have 3 days to decide. Choose wisely. He tossed the envelope at her feet, remounted his horse with fluid grace, and rode away with Carson following. Lydia stood frozen in the garden, staring at the envelope lying in the dirt like a snake waiting to strike. Her hands shook as she bent to pick it up. The document inside was official, stamped with territorial seals, signed by Carson in his capacity as tax assessor. The language was dense and legal, but the meaning was clear. Cole had 30 days to produce original claim documents or face potential forfeiture of his land. Lydia's mind raced. She needed to tell Cole immediately, but what could they do? Where would those original documents be? And even if they found them, would they be enough to counter whatever false claims Hale had manufactured? She was still standing there, the notice clutched in her hand, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the north. Cole and Maisie, returning earlier than expected. Lydia quickly folded the document and tucked it into her apron pocket. She couldn't tell them yet. Not with Maisie present, not without time to think through their options. Miss Rowe, Maisie called out, waving from her perch in front of her father on Thunder's broad back. We saw 3 deer and an eagle, and the aspens are turning gold. It was beautiful. Lydia forced a smile, praying her face didn't betray the terror churning in her gut. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Cole dismounted and lifted Maisie down, but his attention was focused on Lydia. His eyes narrowed as he studied her face. What's wrong? Nothing, just tired from garden work. Lydia. His voice was gentle but firm. You're pale and your hands are shaking. What happened while we were gone? Maisie looked between them, sensing adult concerns. Should I go check on the chickens? Please, Lydia said, grateful for the child's intuition. And see if Henrietta finally laid that egg she's been sitting on. Once Maisie was out of earshot, Cole crossed to Lydia and took her shoulders gently. Tell me, whatever it is, we'll handle it together. The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. Lydia pulled the notice from her pocket and handed it to him, watching his face as he read. The color drained from his cheeks, and his jaw went tight with fury. That son of a— When did this come? How did you get it? Hale brought it himself, with the tax assessor, about an hour ago. Lydia's voice shook despite her efforts to control it. Cole, he said the original claim documents are missing, said the land could be forfeit if you can't produce them. Is that true? Could he really take your ranch? Cole's hands crumpled the paper, his entire body rigid with rage. He can try, but those documents exist. They have to. My father was meticulous about record keeping. He wouldn't have left something this important to chance. Where would they be? I don't know. After the house fire, when I was 15, we lost a lot of papers. But Dad rebuilt, and he would have gotten copies of anything important from the territorial office. They have to be somewhere, in the barn maybe, or buried with the property markers. Hale said you have 30 days. That's not enough time to search everything, to track down records, to— Cole stopped, his eyes hardening. This is because of you, because I defended you at the social. He's using my land as leverage to get to you." "He made that very clear." Lydia swallowed hard. "Cole, he offered me a deal. Said if I agreed to marry him, he'd make this claim issue disappear. If I refuse, he'll proceed with the challenge and you'll lose everything." The silence that followed was absolute. Cole stared at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, fury, and something that looked almost like fear. "Tell me you didn't agree," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you didn't sacrifice yourself to save the ranch." I told him nothing, but Cole, I can't let you lose your home because of me. This is your family's legacy, Maisie's inheritance. If there's a way to protect that, no. Cole's voice cracked like a whip. Absolutely not. You're not selling yourself to that snake to save my land. I'll burn this ranch to the ground before I let that happen. But Maisie would rather have you safe than have this land, Cole interrupted fiercely. Don't you understand? You've become part of this family, part of us. And family doesn't sacrifice each other to save property. We'll find another way. What if there isn't another way? What if the documents really are gone and you can't prove your claim? Cole pulled her against him, holding tight, his heart hammering against her ear. Then we'll fight. We'll hire a lawyer. We'll challenge the assessment. We'll make so much noise that Hale regrets ever trying this scheme. But you're not marrying him, Lydia. That's not even a consideration. Do you hear me? Lydia nodded against his chest, relief and terror warring in her heart. He gave me 3 days to decide. 3 days before he files the official challenge. Then we have 3 days to find those documents. Cole pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. And Lydia, thank you for telling me, for not trying to handle this alone or make some grand sacrifice without talking to me first. We're in this together now. Whatever comes, we face it together. The determination in his voice steadied her. They had 3 days, 72 hours to search a ranch that had existed for 30 years, to find documents that might not exist, to counter a scheme orchestrated by a man with connections and resources they couldn't match. The odds were impossible. But standing in Cole's arms, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, Lydia chose to believe in impossible things. After all, she'd survived being swindled and stranded. She'd found a family in a lonely ranch house. She'd watched a grieving man learn to smile again. If those miracles could happen, maybe they could find one more. Where do we start? She asked. Cole's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but held grim determination. The barn. Dad kept important papers in a strongbox hidden in the tack room. I haven't looked at it since he died. Couldn't bear to go through his things. But if those documents exist anywhere, they'll be there. They spent the rest of the afternoon searching while Maisie was occupied with chores. The strongbox was where Cole remembered. A heavy iron container tucked behind saddles and bridles, covered in years of dust and cobwebs. Cole's hand shook as he used the key from his father's old watch chain to open it. Inside were letters, photographs, a deed to property in Wyoming that predated the Homestead Act, and at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture, a packet of documents marked Original Land Claim, Do Not Lose. Cole's breath came out in a rush of relief so profound he had to sit down on a hay bale. It's here. Thank God it's all here. Lydia knelt beside him as he carefully unwrapped the oilcloth. The documents inside were yellowed but intact. The original homestead claim filed by Cole's father in 1855. The survey map showing exact boundaries, the deed transfer when the property had passed to Cole, and most importantly, a letter from the territorial governor himself acknowledging the Kincaid claim as valid and properly filed. This should be enough, Lydia said, relief making her voice shake. These prove your family's ownership beyond any doubt. It should be, Cole agreed, but his expression remained troubled. But Hale's not stupid. He wouldn't have started this scheme if he didn't have a way to counter official documentation. There's something we're missing, some angle he's working that we can't see yet. As if summoned by the mention of his name, they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching the ranch. Cole and Lydia emerged from the barn to find not just Hale and Carson, but also Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies riding into the yard. Maisie ran from the chicken coop, alarmed by the number of visitors. Cole moved to shield both her and Lydia, positioning himself between his family and the approaching men. Sheriff, Cole said carefully, what brings you out here with such an impressive escort? Morrison looked uncomfortable, which immediately set off alarms in Lydia's mind. The sheriff was a decent man, honest by frontier standards. If he was uneasy, something was very wrong. Cole, I'm sorry about this. Mr. Carson here has filed an official claim challenge with the territorial office. Says there's irregularities in your land documents that need to be resolved. He's got a court order giving him access to your property to verify boundaries and check the physical markers against the survey records. That's interesting timing, Cole said coldly, considering I only received notice of the challenge about 4 hours ago. Most people get 30 days to respond before official action is taken. The timeline was accelerated, Carson said, his voice flat and official, due to evidence suggesting the property markers may have been moved or altered. That constitutes fraud, which requires immediate investigation. That's a lie, Cole said flatly. Those markers have been in the same place for 30 years. My father set them himself, and I've maintained them exactly as he left them. Nevertheless, I have authority to investigate. Carson pulled out the court order, signed by a territorial judge Lydia didn't recognize. You can cooperate, or you can be held in contempt. Your choice, Kincaid. Cole's jaw worked, fury radiating from every line of his body. But with the sheriff and deputies present, with Maisie watching in frightened confusion, there was nothing he could do but step aside and let them proceed. For the next 2 hours, Lydia watched helplessly as Carson and his men methodically examined the property markers, took measurements, and conducted a survey that seemed designed more to find problems than to verify accuracy. Hale stood to the side, watching with barely concealed satisfaction. "Dad, what's happening?" Maisie whispered, clutching Cole's hand. "Are they going to take our ranch?" "No, little bird. We're going to fight this. We have the documents that prove this land is ours." Cole's voice was steady, but Lydia could see the fear in his eyes, the knowledge that documents might not be enough against a system rigged by corruption and greed. Finally, Carson called everyone together. His expression was grave, but Lydia could see the gleam of triumph underneath the professional mask. Based on my initial survey, I found significant discrepancies between the original claim boundaries and the current marker positions. The western boundary appears to have been moved approximately 50 feet beyond the legal limit, which means the Kincaid property is currently encroaching on territorial land. That's a serious violation that could result in forfeiture of the entire claim. "That's impossible," Cole said, his voice dangerous. "Those markers haven't been moved. My father set them exactly according to the survey." "The survey I have on file tells a different story." Carson produced a document that looked old and official. "This is the original 1855 survey. As you can see, the western boundary is clearly marked here." He pointed to a line on the map, "which is approximately 50 feet east of where your current markers stand." "That survey is a forgery," Cole said immediately. "Show me the original in the territorial office, let me examine it for authenticity, and I'll prove it." "The original was damaged in a fire 3 years ago," Carson said smoothly. "This is a certified copy made before the damage occurred. It's perfectly legal and binding." "How convenient," Lydia said, unable to stay silent any longer. "A fire that destroys the original just when Mr. Hale needs evidence to support a fraudulent claim. Sheriff, surely you can see what's happening here." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but Mr. Carson is a territorial official. If he says there's irregularities, I have to take that seriously. Cole, I'm sorry, but you're going to need to hire a lawyer and fight this through the courts. Until it's resolved, the property status is in question." "Which means," Hale spoke up for the first time, his voice silky smooth, "that Kincaid can't sell, transfer, or make any improvements to the property until the matter is settled. And if the court decides against him, the land goes to auction. I believe we've made that clear." Cole looked like he wanted to hit something, preferably Hale's smug face. His fists clenched and unclenched, and Lydia could see the struggle between his desire to protect his land and his knowledge that violence would only make things worse. "Get off my property," Cole said quietly, dangerously. "All of you. And Hale, this isn't over. Not by a long shot." "Oh, I'm counting on that," Hale said, smiling. "Miss Rowe, my offer still stands. 3 days to save all this unpleasantness. Think about it." He tipped his hat mockingly and rode away, Carson and his men following. The sheriff lingered a moment longer. "Cole, get a good lawyer. Fast. And if you can find any other documentation that supports your claim, letters, photographs, anything that shows those markers in their current position 30 years ago, it would help your case. Morrison's voice dropped. Between you and me, I don't trust Carson or Hale, but my hands are tied unless you can prove fraud. I'm sorry. After they left, Cole stood in the yard, staring at nothing, his hands still clenched into fists. Maisie clung to Lydia, crying silently, and Lydia held the child close while her own heart broke for what this family was facing. We're going to lose it, Cole said finally, his voice hollow. Aren't we? Even with the documents, even with the truth on our side. They've rigged the system, forged surveys, convenient fires, corrupt officials. How do we fight that? We find a way, Lydia said firmly, though she had no idea what that way might be. Cole, your father left those documents for a reason. He knew this land would be challenged someday. It's too valuable, too well positioned. There has to be something else, some other proof we're missing. Like what? Hale's thought of everything. Maybe not everything. Lydia's mind raced, trying to remember details from the afternoon's confrontation. Carson said the markers were moved 50 feet, but Cole, you've lived on this land your whole life. Wouldn't you know if someone had moved boundary markers? Wouldn't there be evidence, old marker holes, disturbed ground, something? Cole's head snapped up, hope flickering in his eyes. You're right. Those markers were set in concrete by my father. Moving them would leave traces. If we can prove the current markers are in their original positions, it proves Carson's survey is the forgery, not Dad's documents. How do we prove that? We dig, Cole said grimly, around the base of each marker. If they're original, the concrete will show 30 years of weathering, of root growth, of ground settlement. If they were recently placed, the concrete will be newer, the surrounding soil disturbed. It's not perfect evidence, but it's something. Then we start digging tonight, Lydia said, before Hale can send anyone back to tamper with them. They worked through the night, Cole and Lydia taking turns with the shovel, while Maisie held the lantern. Around each of the disputed western markers, they carefully excavated the soil, exposing the concrete bases that held the wooden posts in place. And with each marker they uncovered, the evidence became clearer. The concrete was old, weathered, with roots grown through it and mineral deposits that only formed over decades. These markers had been here for 30 years, exactly as Cole's father had placed them. By dawn, they had documented everything with careful measurements and notes. It wasn't much, but it was proof that Carson's survey was fraudulent, that the markers hadn't been moved, that the Kincaid claim was legitimate. The question now was whether anyone in power would care enough to listen. They had 2 days left when the real trouble began. Cole had spent every waking hour documenting their findings, writing letters to territorial officials, and trying to find a lawyer willing to take their case against a corrupt tax assessor. The responses were uniformly discouraging. Most lawyers wanted money up front that Cole didn't have, and those who might have worked on contingency were afraid of crossing Carson and whoever was backing him in the territorial government. Lydia watched Cole grow more haggard with each passing hour, the weight of potential failure pressing down on him like a physical force. He barely ate, barely slept, and the light that had begun to return to his eyes after weeks of healing was dimming again under the crushing pressure of possibly losing everything. On the morning of the second day, Lydia was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard horses approaching at speed. Through the window, she saw Sheriff Morrison riding hard, and her stomach dropped. He wouldn't be coming at dawn unless something terrible had happened. Cole met the sheriff in the yard, and Lydia joined them, wiping flour from her hands. Morrison looked grim and exhausted, like he'd been riding all night. Cole, we have a problem. The barn at the Henderson Ranch burned last night. Arson, no question about it. Someone doused it in kerosene and lit it up. They lost 12 horses and nearly lost their house when the wind shifted. Cole's face went pale. Is everyone all right? The family's fine, but they're devastated. And Cole, Morrison hesitated. They found something in the debris. A letter addressed to you, left where it wouldn't burn completely. A warning. It said, accept the deal or this happens to you next. The words hung in the morning air like a death sentence. Lydia felt ice slide down her spine. This wasn't just about land claims and legal maneuvering anymore. Hale was escalating to violence, to terrorism, to threatening everything Cole held dear. Where's Maisie? Cole asked immediately. Still sleeping, Lydia said. I haven't woken her yet. Good. Keep her inside today. Don't let her out of your sight. Cole turned back to Morrison. Can you arrest Hale for this? He's threatening arson, threatening my family. With what evidence? The letter wasn't signed. There's no proof he was involved, just like there's no proof he's behind the fraudulent survey or any of the rest of it. Cole, I know what's happening here. Everyone with half a brain knows what's happening, but knowing and proving are two different things. So what am I supposed to do? Wait for my barn to burn? Wait for my daughter to be hurt? You're supposed to protect your family first and your property second, Morrison said quietly. And if that means leaving the ranch for a while until this blows over. I'm not running, Cole said flatly. This is my land, my home. I won't be driven off by a criminal and a corrupt official. Morrison sighed heavily. Then at least let me post a deputy here. Someone to watch the property, to be a witness if anything happens. It's not much, but it's something. Cole wanted to refuse. Lydia could see it in the set of his jaw, but practicality won out. Fine, but tell your deputy to stay alert. These aren't amateurs we're dealing with. After Morrison left, promising to send someone by noon, Cole stood in the yard staring at the barn as if memorizing every board and beam, preparing himself for the possibility of watching it burn. Lydia moved to his side, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her presence. We need to get Maisie away from here, she said quietly. Send her to stay with someone in town until this is resolved. She doesn't need to see this, to be afraid in her own home. She won't go. And I won't risk her traveling with Hale's people watching our every move. She's safer here where I can protect her. Cole, he burned someone's barn, killed their horses. What's to stop him from— Nothing, Cole interrupted, his voice rough. Nothing stops men like Hale except other men willing to stand against them, which is why I'm not running, not hiding, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing me break. This isn't about satisfaction anymore. This is about keeping your family safe. My family includes you now, Cole said, finally turning to look at her. His gray eyes were fierce, burning with an intensity that took her breath away. And I'm not letting him take you either. Whatever scheme he has planned, whatever pressure he thinks he can bring to bear, it won't work. You're staying here where you belong. The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had since Hale had first appeared with his threats and ultimatums. She reached for Cole's hand, lacing her fingers through his. Then we face this together, all of us, whatever comes. They spent the day preparing for the worst. Cole moved the horses to the far pasture where they'd be harder to trap in a fire. He filled barrels with water and positioned them around the barn and house. He loaded his rifle and checked his ammunition. And through it all, Maisie watched with frightened eyes, understanding that something terrible was building even if she didn't know all the details. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Lydia found Cole in the barn checking on things one final time. He was standing in the tack room, running his hand over the worn leather of his father's saddle, and the grief in his posture made her heart ache. I keep thinking about what my father would do, Cole said without turning. He built this place from nothing, fought drought and wolves and winters that killed cattle by the dozens. He never gave up, never quit fighting for what was his. And now I'm about to lose it all because of a con man and a corrupt official. You're not going to lose it, Lydia said firmly. We have evidence. We have the truth. That has to count for something. Does it? Cole turned to face her, and his expression was bleak. Hale has money and connections. He's willing to commit arson and threaten families. He's willing to burn down the world to get what he wants. How do we fight that? By not being alone. Lydia moved closer, taking both his hands in hers. Cole, you've been carrying this burden by yourself for so long. Your grief over Anne, your worry about Maisie, the weight of maintaining this ranch. But you're not alone anymore. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere, no matter what Hale threatens or promises. We're going to find a way through this together. Cole pulled her close, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid and unstable. I can't lose you, he whispered against her hair. I just found you. I just started believing in the future again. I can't. You won't, Lydia promised, though she had no idea how she'd keep that promise.
We'll figure this out. There has to be something we're missing, some angle we haven't considered. They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, while outside the deputy Morrison had sent a young man named Peters, made his rounds checking the property. And in town, unknown to them, wheels were turning that would change everything. Mrs. Patterson had spent the day after the Henderson barn fire making her own inquiries. She'd lived in Rustwood for 40 years, remembered when Cole's father had first claimed the land, and she knew corruption when she smelled it. So she did what practical frontier women had always done when official channels failed. She organized the community. By nightfall, she'd gathered every rancher and business owner who'd been affected by Hale's schemes over the years. There were more than Lydia would have guessed, men who'd lost property to suspicious claim challenges, women who'd been swindled by fake marriage proposals, families who'd been forced to sell land at unfair prices to avoid manufactured legal troubles. The pattern was clear once people started comparing stories. Hale had been operating his schemes for years, protected by corrupt officials and the difficulty of proving fraud across territorial boundaries. But we can prove it now, Mrs. Patterson told the gathered crowd in her store's back room. Cole Kincaid has documentation that shows Carson's survey is fraudulent. The Henderson fire was arson, clearly meant to intimidate. And if we all testify to the pattern of Hale's behavior, we can make enough noise that the territorial governor will have to investigate. The governor's 6 days' ride from here, someone pointed out, and by the time he investigates, the Kincaid place could be burned to the ground. Then we protect it, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. We take turns keeping watch. We make sure Hale knows that if he moves against Cole, he moves against all of us. He's counting on us being too scattered, too afraid to stand together. So we prove him wrong. It was decided quickly after that. Within an hour, armed men were riding out to the Kincaid ranch to reinforce the lone deputy. Mrs. Patterson herself penned letters to the territorial governor, to the land office, to every official who might care about corruption in the claim system. And Sarah Chen, who'd maintained a cool professional relationship with most of the town, surprised everyone by volunteering to ride to the territorial capital herself with the evidence. I'm Chinese, she said bluntly when people questioned the wisdom of her making such a dangerous trip. That means I'm used to not being taken seriously. But I'm also a property owner and a taxpayer, and I know how to make noise when necessary. I'll get these documents to people who'll listen. None of this did Lydia and Cole know as they sat up that night, taking turns keeping watch. Maisie had finally fallen asleep after much coaxing, exhausted from fear and uncertainty. The house was quiet except for the creak of floorboards as Cole paced and the occasional sound of Deputy Peters making his rounds outside. Lydia was at the kitchen table going through Cole's father's documents again when something caught her eye. It was a small notation on the original land claim, almost hidden in the dense legal language. Monument stone placed at NW corner, sealed documentation beneath, per surveyor requirements, 1855. Cole, she called softly, not wanting to wake Maisie. Come look at this. Cole appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, instantly alert. What is it? Your father's original claim mentions a monument stone at the northwest corner with sealed documentation beneath it. Do you know what that means? Cole's eyes widened. The cornerstone. I'd forgotten about it. Dad told me once that early surveyors sometimes buried duplicate documents at property corners as backup proof of claims, but that was before the Homestead Act simplified the process. I never thought. He grabbed the document, reading it carefully. If that stone is still there, and if the documents underneath survived, they'd prove the exact original boundaries better than any survey map, Lydia finished. Cole, where's the northwest corner? About a quarter-mile past the disputed western boundary, in the old growth forest where Dad refused to log because he said those trees were here before people and should stay after we're gone. Cole was already moving, grabbing a lantern. If we can find that stone, dig up those documents. You're not going alone, Lydia said firmly. It's dark, and Hale could have people watching. Which is exactly why you need to stay here with Maisie. If something happens to me, someone needs to protect her. And if something happens to you, those documents mean nothing because no one else knows where to look, Lydia countered. Deputy Peters is here. Maisie's asleep. We go together, we go fast, and we get back before anyone knows we've left. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but they both knew she was right. He checked his rifle, made sure Deputy Peters knew they'd be gone for an hour, and then led Lydia out into the night. The walk to the northwest corner took 30 minutes through rough terrain. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to navigate by, but every shadow looked like a potential threat. Cole moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew his land intimately, and Lydia struggled to keep pace behind him. The old-growth forest was exactly as Cole had described, towering pines that predated settlement, their branches so thick they blocked out the stars. In the darkness, they were like ancient sentinels guarding secrets. Cole swept his lantern back and forth, searching for something specific. "There," he said finally, pointing to a large flat stone nearly hidden by decades of fallen needles and forest debris. "That's it. Dad said the surveyor carved his initials into the corner. Help me clear this off." They worked frantically, brushing away needles and dirt until the stone's surface was visible. And there, barely legible under years of weathering, were carved initials, J.W., the surveyor who'd filed Cole's father's original claim. "We need to move it," Cole said, wedging a fallen branch under one edge. "It's going to be heavy. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Together they levered the stone up and to the side. Underneath was a metal box, green with age and moisture but still intact. Cole's hand shook as he pried open the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly protected them from the elements, were documents. A duplicate of the original survey. Letters from the surveyor describing the exact placement of boundary markers. Photographs, actual photographs from 1855, showing Cole's father and the surveyor standing beside newly placed corner posts. And most damning of all, a certified statement from the Territorial Land Office acknowledging receipt and approval of the Kincaid claim with specific boundary measurements that exactly matched the current marker positions. "This is it," Cole breathed. "This proves everything. The current markers are original. Carson's survey is fraudulent. The Kincaid claim is legitimate and has been for 30 years. Hale has nothing." Lydia felt tears of relief streaming down her face. "We did it. Cole, we actually found proof. We need to get this back to the house, secured somewhere safe. Then tomorrow we take it to Morrison, to the judge, to anyone who'll—" The sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the night. The bullet hit a tree 2 feet from Cole's head, sending bark and splinters flying. Lydia screamed as Cole grabbed her, pulling her down behind the stone. "Well, well," Griffin Hale's voice came from the darkness. "Looks like you've been busy. I had my men watching the ranch, and they said you two went for a midnight stroll. Couldn't figure out why until I saw you digging. That's when I remembered the old stories about buried claim documents. Smart thinking, Kincaid. Unfortunately for you, I'm smarter." Cole pulled Lydia closer, using his body to shield her, the document box trapped between them. "You're done, Hale. These documents prove everything. Your scheme is over. Only if you live to deliver them." Hale stepped into the lantern light, and he wasn't alone. Carson was with him, along with 2 other men Lydia recognized from his earlier visits, hired muscle with guns and no conscience. See, the beautiful thing about being this far from the house is that nobody will hear anything. An unfortunate accident, really. You and your hired girl came out here for some privacy, got lost in the dark, maybe fell and hit your head, so tragic. And by the time anyone finds you, those documents will be ashes and the land will be mine. "You'd murder us?" Lydia's voice shook but held steady. "Kill us in cold blood for a piece of land?" "I've killed for less," Hale said casually. "And it's not just a piece of land. It's prime ranch property positioned perfectly for the railroad expansion that's coming through in 2 years. The territory is offering contracts to supply timber and beef for construction. This land will make whoever owns it rich. I've invested too much time and money in acquiring it to let a grieving widower and his stray bride ruin my plans." Cole's hand slowly moved toward his rifle, which had fallen when they dived for cover. But Hale's men had weapons already drawn, and Lydia could see the calculation in Cole's eyes. He couldn't draw fast enough to save them both. "Don't be stupid, Kincaid," Hale warned. "Drop the rifle, nice and slow, and hand over that box." For a terrible moment, Lydia thought Cole might try to fight anyway. His entire body was tensed, ready to spring, willing to die protecting what was his. But then she felt him take a shuddering breath and slowly push the rifle away. "Smart choice," Hale said. "Carson, get the box." Carson moved forward cautiously, and that's when Lydia heard it.
The sound of horses approaching fast, multiple horses, and voices calling out. Hale heard it too, his expression darkening. "That'll be your deputy, and whatever reinforcements Morrison sent," he said. "But they won't get here in time to save you. Carson, grab the box. You two," he gestured to his hired men. "Make it quick." The gunmen raised their weapons, and Lydia closed her eyes, pressing against Cole, waiting for the impact of bullets. But instead of shots, she heard shouting, the thunder of hooves, and then Deputy Peter's voice rang out clear and commanding. "Drop your weapons, all of you. You're surrounded." Lydia's eyes flew open to see torchlight flooding the forest as what looked like half of Rustwood materialized from the trees. Peters wasn't alone. He'd brought 10 armed men, all of them neighbors and friends who'd organized to protect the Kincaid Ranch. Hale's face contorted with rage as he realized he was outnumbered and outgunned. His hired men dropped their weapons immediately, hands raised. Carson looked like he might be sick. Only Hale stood defiant, his hand still on his pistol. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think these frontier yokels scare me? I have connections, lawyers, officials in my pocket, and we have this, Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through his bravado. She pushed through the crowd, holding papers high. "Sworn testimony from 15 families you've defrauded over the years. Documentation of your scheme with Carson to falsify land claims. Evidence of arson at the Henderson Ranch. One of your hired idiots bragged about it in the saloon to the wrong person. And now attempted murder with a dozen witnesses." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, looking grimmer than Lydia had ever seen him. "Griffin Hale, Carson, you're both under arrest. Murder conspiracy, fraud, arson, corruption of public office. I've sent riders to the territorial capital with all the evidence. You're done." "You can't prove any of that," Hale said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Actually, we can," Sarah Chen said, emerging from the crowd. "I've been documenting your activities for 2 years, ever since you tried to swindle my cousin out of her inheritance. Every scheme, every fake claim, every bribed official. I have names, dates, amounts, and I've already delivered copies to the territorial governor's office." The color drained from Hale's face as he realized the trap had closed completely around him. He made one last desperate lunge for his pistol, but Cole was faster. He surged up from behind the stone and hit Hale with a punch that carried 2 years of grief, weeks of fear, and a lifetime of protecting what was his. Hale went down hard and didn't get back up. The crowd erupted in cheers. Morrison's deputies moved in to bind Hale and Carson, while Cole stood over his fallen enemy, breathing hard, his knuckles bleeding again. Then he turned to Lydia, pulled her into his arms, and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "It's over," he said, his voice breaking. "It's finally over." Lydia held him just as tightly, feeling the tension drain from his body, replaced by exhaustion and relief, so profound it was almost painful. Around them, their neighbors celebrated, clapping Cole on the back, congratulating them on their find, promising to stand witness when the case went to court. Mrs. Patterson was the one who eventually pulled them apart, her stern face softened by tears. "You two need to get home. That child of yours will wake up terrified if you're not there. We'll handle the rest, getting these criminals to jail, securing the evidence, making sure everything's documented properly." "I don't know how to thank you," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you. You saved our lives tonight, saved our home." "That's what neighbors do," said one of the ranchers. "We look out for each other. Should have done it sooner before Hale got this far, but we're doing it now." The walk back to the ranch felt like walking through a dream. The metal box was secure under Cole's arm, the documents inside worth more than gold because they represented proof, justice, home. Deputy Peters walked with them, and behind them came a parade of neighbors, all armed, all determined to keep watch until Hale and Carson were safely locked away. Maisie was awake when they reached the house, standing on the porch in her nightgown, her eyes huge with fear. "Dad! Miss Rowe! I heard shots and voices, and I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence before Cole swept her up in his arms, holding her close. "We're fine, little bird. Better than fine. We found proof that the ranch is ours, and the bad men who tried to take it are going to jail. It's over. We're safe." Maisie burst into tears, clinging to her father, and Lydia joined the embrace, wrapping her arms around both of them.
They stood there on the porch while dawn began to break over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Lydia thought she'd never seen anything more beautiful. The legal proceedings took 3 weeks. Hale and Carson were formally charged with fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and a dozen other crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. The buried documents proved the Kincaid claim beyond any doubt, and testimony from Hale's other victims established a pattern of criminal behavior that even his expensive lawyers couldn't explain away. The territorial governor, embarrassed by the corruption in his land office, made an example of the case, and both men were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The Kincaid Ranch was officially confirmed as Cole's property, with a new survey conducted by an honest official who verified that the markers had never been moved. The judge even awarded Cole damages for the stress and expense of fighting the fraudulent claim, though Cole immediately donated that money to help the Henderson family rebuild their barn. Through it all, Lydia and Maisie worked to restore normalcy to the ranch. The garden produced a small but satisfying harvest. The horses returned to the main pasture. The house slowly released its tension, becoming once again a place of safety rather than fear. 2 months after Hale's arrest, as the first snow began to fall on the distant mountains, Cole found Lydia in the kitchen preparing dinner. Maisie was doing homework at the table, and the scene was so domestic, so perfectly ordinary, that Cole had to stop and marvel at how different life looked now compared to the dark days of summer. "Lydia," he said, his voice carrying an edge of nervousness that made both women look up. "Can we talk? Outside for a minute?" Maisie's eyes went wide with understanding, and she grinned. "Go! I'll watch the stew." Lydia wiped her hands on her apron, confused by Maisie's excitement and Cole's nervousness. She followed him out to the porch, where the evening air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and coming winter. Cole took both her hands in his, and Lydia's heart started to pound. He looked nervous and determined and hopeful all at once, and she suddenly knew what was coming. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," Cole began, trying to find the right words, the right moment, but then I realized there is no perfect moment or perfect words. There's just the truth, and the truth is this. You saved us. Not just from Hale, but from ourselves. You came into our lives when we were drowning in grief and showed us how to breathe again. You made this house a home. You gave Maisie her smile back. And you gave me, his voice caught, you gave me permission to live again instead of just surviving. Tears were already streaming down Lydia's face, but Cole pressed on. I know I'm not an easy man. I know I'm still carrying grief that'll probably never fully go away. I know life on this ranch is hard work with no guarantees, but I also know that I love you, completely, with whatever pieces of my heart are capable of loving. And I'm asking, Lydia Rowe, will you marry me? Not to fill a role or replace someone lost, but because you belong here with us? Because we're better together, because I can't imagine a future without you in it? Yes, Lydia said immediately, not needing to think, knowing this was right in a way that fake letters and desperate plans never had been. Yes, Cole. 1,000 times yes. Cole pulled a small box from his pocket with shaking hands. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but beautiful. It was my mother's, he explained. Dad gave it to me before he died, said I'd know when I met someone worthy of wearing it. I want you to have it, if you'll accept it. Along with everything that comes with it, this ranch, Maisie, me, all of it. Lydia's hands trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. I accept all of it. The ranch, your daughter, you. Especially you. They kissed then, properly and thoroughly, with no ghost between them, no fear of tomorrow, just the perfect present moment. And from inside the house they heard Maisie's delighted squeal and the sound of her running to the porch. You said yes. I knew you would. I told Dad you would, and he was nervous for nothing. Maisie threw herself at both of them, and they caught her together, laughing, crying, holding each other as the first snowflakes began to fall. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Rustwood Church, with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire service. Sarah Chen brought flowers from her greenhouse. Even Sheriff Morrison showed up,
looking pleased that his town had found a way to defeat corruption and celebrate love in the same season. Maisie served as both flower girl and witness, wearing a new dress of green velvet that Lydia had sewn specially for the occasion. As she walked down the aisle, scattering flower petals, she caught Lydia's eye and mouthed, "I told you it would work." The winter that followed was cold but joyful. Lydia and Cole settled into marriage with the ease of people who'd already survived crises together, who knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, who'd chosen each other with full knowledge of what they were getting. They worked side by side, managing the ranch, planned for spring planting, and made love by firelight while snow piled up outside. Maisie thrived under the stability of having two parents again, her natural brightness returning in full force. She helped Lydia plan a massive garden expansion for spring and convinced Cole to let her learn to ride Thunder, even though the horse was technically too big for her. She talked about her mother often, weaving Anne's memory into their daily lives with the comfortable ease of someone who understood that loving the present didn't mean forgetting the past. On Christmas Eve, as they sat around the fire eating cookies and listening to Maisie read the nativity story, Cole pulled Lydia aside for a moment. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to the window. Outside, visible in the moonlight reflecting off snow, was Maisie building snowmen in the yard. But not just one or two. She was building 5 figures, each distinct, each positioned carefully in a circle. "That's us," Lydia realized, her throat tightening. "You, me, her?" "The baby you're carrying," Cole said softly. "Though we haven't told her yet. And that 5th figure, Anne," Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "She's including her mother in the family." "She told me earlier that love changes shape but doesn't disappear," Cole said, his arm coming around Lydia's shoulders. "That her mama is still part of us, still watching over us, and that this—" He gestured to the snowmen, to the house, to their life together. "This is exactly what her mother would have wanted. A family that keeps growing, keeps loving, keeps finding reasons to celebrate even when the world gets cold and dark." Lydia turned in his arms, pressing close, feeling the baby between them, barely showing but undeniably there, a promise of future and hope. "How did you know I was pregnant?" "I only just realized it myself." "I've watched a woman carry my child before," Cole said gently. "I recognize the signs. And Lydia? I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Is that normal?" "Completely normal." She kissed him softly. "We're going to be fine. All of us. We've survived cons and fires and corruption and near death. We can survive becoming parents together." "Together," Cole repeated, like it was a prayer. "That's the word that makes everything possible." Outside, Maisie finished her snow family and stood back to admire her work. The 5 figures stood in a circle, their stick arms reaching toward each other, their faces marked with rocks and charcoal, smiling despite being made of frozen water that would melt come spring. But that was the point, Lydia realized. Everything was temporary. Joy and sorrow, winter and spring, presence and absence. What mattered was the love that persisted through all the changes, that adapted and grew and found new forms when old ones couldn't be sustained. She'd come west wearing a wedding dress meant for a man who didn't exist, carrying dreams built on lies. She'd been abandoned at a train station with nothing but a carpet bag and failing hope. And then a child in her mother's boots had appeared and asked an impossible question: "Will you marry my daddy instead?" That question had led to this moment, to a ranch house warm with firelight and family, to a husband who'd learned to love again, to a daughter who'd chosen her, to a baby growing under her heart, to a life she'd never imagined but couldn't imagine living without. Sometimes the wrong train took you to exactly the right place. Sometimes getting lost was how you found your way home. And sometimes the family you chose was the one that had been waiting for you all along, built not from blood alone but from courage and hope, and the willingness to believe that broken things could be made whole again. As snow fell outside and firelight danced inside, as Maisie came bursting back through the door with snow in her hair and joy on her face, as Cole pulled them both close with the protective tenderness of a man who'd learned what really mattered, Lydia sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances. For brave children who collected stranded brides. For ranchers who defended honor with their fists and hearts. for communities that stood together against corruption, for love that survived loss and grew stronger in the surviving. This wasn't the future she'd been promised in those fraudulent letters, but it was the future she'd been meant for all along, a home forged from grit and hope, a family built from loss and love, and a legacy that would outlast the winter, outlast the hardship, outlast everything but the truth that mattered most. Some people were meant to find each other, and sometimes, even when everything seemed wrong, fate found a way to make it right. The end.